that's a good thing. You folks are able to converse with each other using text. Using the chat feature, you will be able to obviously communicate with me as well. There we go. We still have a few students coming in, so I'm just going to wait for a couple of minutes and then we'll get started.
Hi, before we start, could I ask a question?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Akifa.
Did you want our assignment to be in a specific document, like PDF or Word?
Yeah, if you could do PDF or Word, it makes it easier because otherwise I don't have any way to read like any of these, the Apple-based stuff that like Pages and stuff, I'm not able to access and read. Brian, you have a question?
Yeah, so I finished the assignment. I was wondering, do we have like a Dropbox to drop?
Yes, it should show up. I mean, when you go to D2L and you click, you can find it in the Dropbox itself, or you just click assignment and it should take you straight to the Dropbox.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead, Akifa.
And I also wanted to confirm that essentialism is one of the paradigms, right?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. And one more thing. In our group yesterday, there were 3 people that weren't there.
Yep.
We did email them, but we didn't get a response. So what would and I don't believe they were in class yesterday either. So what would we do if they don't show up?
Okay, so there are it really doesn't make much of a difference how big the group is, whether it's a group of 1 or 6, because you should be reading the entire content anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And the burden of presentation is still 5 to 7 minutes. So whether you have more content to talk about or less, I mean, you just have to reformat what you're going to talk about. So if you end up with a 3-person group because a couple people, I know one person has had a serious accident and they can't participate in class, so they'll be viewing all the videos of the lectures later and trying to complete the course. So there can be circumstances where you are either having an unresponsive classmate or a classmate who may no longer be in class. In that situation, the options are essentially that you can still continue to do the work because the chapters themselves that each group has are not the same size, and I haven't looked at, well, one group gets 17 pages, one group gets 15. I haven't done that kind of math. It's relatively simple read. You just split the concepts up and you talk about what you wish to. Obviously, when you have more to talk about, I look at it as an advantage because you can it looks better for your presentation. But work with what you have.
So
if there's a group of 1, I will reshuffle groups. But if that's not the case, if there's 2 or more, I'm not going to bother.
So do you think we should still break it up into like 6 sections and make a presentation accordingly in case someone does show up?
No, nobody's going to show up late. If people don't
Okay.
show up till by the end of the day today, they're not going to show up. And
All
the
right.
breakout rooms today will be assigned at lunch. So if they're not there in class, they're not in your group. If it's only 2 of you, I might assign a 3rd person. I might move 1 person over, and we'll take a look at that as we're creating the breakout rooms. We might move 1 or 2 people over just to make it a little more even. But there's going to be one group with 1 or 2 groups with more and 1 or 2 groups with less.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
No problem. Who else has their hand up? Chloe, yes.
Hey, there was a couple of people in my group yesterday asking about the PDF for the book. Could you just advise again on how to get that, if possible?
There's no well, I don't think there's a PDF. It's an ebook. So it's on the course outline. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Have you looked at the course outline yet?
I have the book.
You have the physical book. Okay. At this point, don't order the physical book. You need to complete your assignments quickly, and that's what I said. Just get the ebook. It's going to show up. It's instant, right? So don't waste
That's
your
easy to access on the site.
Sorry.
So that's easy to access on your course outline information.
Yeah, it has the name of the required textbook. So if you just put the title in, it should take you to the publisher, and you should be able to access the ebook. 2 messages on the chat window. Okay, so you can buy the online version on Amazon. Thank you, Erica. Erica's well, everyone can see the message, so that should help. Okay. Does anybody have any other questions or concerns before we get started? Oh, one more thing I wanted to clarify. The presentation is not a group mark. Each person will be marked for their own performance, for the presentation of their own section, their own content. There is a mark for logical flow of sections and stuff, but that's probably the only shared mark in how you organize yourselves. And I think that's actually a freebie, really, because you're going to organize it as the chapter is organized. So really, that's a bonus mark. If whatever it is, 5 mark worth, you're going to get it unless you absolutely don't say a word during your presentation. Okay, so that should be straightforward. But yeah, so for example, if you have a group where a couple people are doing more work than others, you're responsible for your own section. And each person will be making their own presentation. This is not, yes, you're working as a team, but you're really doing your own pieces. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, I'm going to turn my video off just to not overwhelm internet-based system. I do live in a rural area. It has good internet connection, but I recognize that having a whole bunch of videos on somebody's screen is probably not useful for anyone. So I'm going to stop my video. I'll share my screen. I just like to say hello to everybody and have the video on in the beginning of class, so it's not just a disembodied voice speaking to everybody. Okay. All right. So yesterday's lectures are all online. The YouTube links are put up on D2L. So if you want to go back and listen to something again, you can go ahead and do that. If you're quite comfortable, 3 participants raised hands. Let me see who those people are. So I don't know what the order is, but I have Brian and Melissa. So Brian, go first, please.
This is for the assignment, right?
No, you have a hand raised. I don't know if you had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to take it down.
Oh, and I forgot to pay attention whether it was a second time.
Seems to be.
Oh, there we go. It's gone now. Melissa, did you have a question still?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, go ahead.
When I tried to open up the YouTube links, it said this video is private and I can't watch them. I don't know if that happened to anyone else.
Thank you for pointing that out. It's probably not going to be different for anybody else. Since we're all online, let me address that right away. Okay, let's see. So, none of it should be private, but okay, bear with me. We're not going to be watching them right now. I will fix them. I'm not quite sure why they are even private. They shouldn't be. Okay, we'll fix them after. Let's finish the content. If by our evening session you still find them to be private and not accessible, let me know. They shouldn't be private. Okay, you guys can see my screen. So there's one more message in the chat window. We'll take care of that, and then I will. Okay, Susan has confirmed the private thing as well. Okay. All right. So what we're going to talk about today is men's bodies, the physicality of men's bodies itself. This is a quote from Powell and Longino. It's difficult to imagine a disembodied social gerontology, and yet the body is something that is more implied than discussed. One of the challenges with traditional sociology is that there's very little attention paid to the physicality, to the body itself. It's no different in studying men and men's agings. Even though bodies are important, including the body, especially in older societies, it's everywhere. You are represented by your body itself. Okay, chat window. Okay, I'm going to not pay attention to messages that are of a personal nature right now, unless they're relevant to the lecture, just because the chat window can get pretty busy. We have a lot of material to cover. If the chat is relevant to the content itself, to what we're talking in class, that's fine. If it's an extension for assignments, if it's, I don't know, if it's a delay in something, anything that's not immediately relevant, we will address afterwards. I'm not going to ignore your messages in the chat window, but it's just something that we will not address right now. Okay. Our body is the medium through which we experience growing older. So it's always an unfinished process. It mediates social relations, and it is, it's employed by obviously pharmaceutical companies and expanding anti-aging enterprise to sell stuff to. So you have lifestyles for people who are newly retired. So you have this very youthful looking older adult heterosexual white couple enjoying motorcycle rides or being out on kayaks, and then there's different kinds of insurance marketed to them. Obviously there are pharmaceutical products and medical surgical interventions, right from cosmetic surgery to erectile dysfunction drugs. So the body continues to it's recognized that it is there, even though it's not, doesn't seem to be that obvious and that present in conversations. Now, what the author, there we go. So in chapter 3, the author's use of the word body, basically he's talking about the material body, the fleshy entity. So we all have bodies, we live with our bodies. The term corporeal means off body. So corporeality essentially is a bodily aging. So the reason he wants to talk about aging bodies is, we have a course in our gerontology program called the Aging Body, which deals with the actual physical changes, the changes in cells, the changes in muscles, the changes in different body systems. That's not the objective of studying aging male bodies. The idea is that for a very long time, the change in the body itself as we aged was long ignored in sociology, and it was practically ignored in gerontology as well. So what this chapter does is there is a discussion of how men take their body for granted pretty much all the time until they actually experience something, and usually it's associated with pain or discomfort or a diagnosis of a disease and so on. The chapter also addresses how the consciousness of the body, it hinges on physical functioning for most older men and doesn't so much depend on how the body looks itself. And a part of this chapter also discusses how the majority of older men reject consumerist concerns with aesthetics, and they consider it unnatural, and they don't consider it a part of their genuine masculinity practice. Now, Chris Schilling wrote a book in 2003 called The Body and Social Theory, and he refers to bodies as being an absent presence within social theory. What he means is that the body itself has, and we just spoke about this, the body typically is ignored in sociology, even when you have medical or sports sociologies who indirectly study it. Now, this comment is applicable even to gerontology theories and critical men's theories about aging bodies. Typically, old men's bodies they are present in the sense that they are occasionally referred to by researchers as consumer bodies or medicalized bodies. But the conversation about bodies themselves are generally non-existent, particularly about the gendered body and the role of the gendered body in later life. There obviously has been increased attention over time to bodies. There are other authors. So Peter Oberg in 1996, he speaks about, sorry, I haven't mentioned. So Peter Oberg talks in 1986 about the gendered body and how people they exclude the body from investigation in aging studies. It's almost like an invisible existence. So since Oberg's observation, there has been some work outside of a biomedical lens which addresses bodies. That speaks to the natural, that speaks to its role in society, in social interpretation, and so on. So what the author wants to do in this chapter is he wants to try to discuss men's bodies in a non-medical context, not related to health matters. And he's going to make an attempt because there's so little work, it's hard to have a discussion without the framework of a massive amount of background work already done. Typically in sociology, the past practice has placed a lot of emphasis on how younger bodies are regulated by religion or by medicine, or how bodies are constrained by inequalities due to people's social situation, due to their class, due to their ethnicity, and so on. There is a conversation, there is a dialogue about how the natural body is regulated, and it's made quote unquote docile through social discourses and norms that produce a kind of social body. A lot has been learned about the oppression of bodies, especially racialized bodies, women's bodies, and the bodies of certain classes of people. So work by Drew Leder in 1990, what he does is he directs our attention to a different absence-presence. And he suggests that the aging body is basically absent in our everyday experience, especially from the first person point of view, from our own experiences. We become aware of our own bodies when there is disturbance, when there's pain, when there's as Leder calls it, an alien presence, or when we're in new situations, we're interacting with strangers, the body is exposed to a certain weird kind of motion, exposed to a situation where the body responds to a person in front of it or an object. So the body itself often becomes an object subjected to both our own observation in these situations or to other people's observation. Aging men's bodies are registered as experiences of aging men. They're not thought about as specifically bodily experiences. bodies mostly remain absent until they aren't. So amidst all the current theorizing around the body, Bourdieu's work on habitus is special because it's quite sophisticated in the fact that it provides an understanding of the processes of embodiment, the ways in which our internal and bodily processes are connected with and fashioned by social life. So it makes a connection between how we present our body, what we think of our body, and how it's a representation of all of the social processes that surround the physicality of us, particularly men. That his work is about men. That applies to everybody. Bourdieu's recognition is that we are our body in both its physical and symbolic capital. And as we age, we engage in struggles in the pursuit of our own interests. So his sociology of the body fits the postmodern cultural emphasis on personal responsibility and of agency. So the body is a living expression, and people find that the way they express themselves is function of all of their experiences. In his 1984 book, what Bourdieu addresses is how the body is, it represents the hierarchies of social power. And the example that is presented by Bourdieu and Schoenberg is of old Japanese Americans. Now, during World War II, because Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese forces and the US was at war with Japan, several hundreds of thousands of Japanese American families were quote unquote interned, which is a euphemism for imprisonment in large camps. They were imprisoned in large camps, and the only crime was that they had Japanese ancestry. And this was, I mean, obviously a very racist policy to do that. But the consequence was that because of this horrible process that was done to them, all Japanese American men who were born before World War II, they embody their stigmatized otherness and childhood horror of being forced into prison camps. They came to practice what we know as docile bodies. Now, this is quite different from the experience of white German Americans. White German Americans, despite the fact that Germany was no less guilty than Japan was as an instigator and as an oppressor in World War II, German Americans were not interned or imprisoned or anything of that sort. So their bodily expression was no different than any other American in the United States. So it's this kind of a suppressed bodily expression is also seen in Canada, where we see victims of the residential school system, men who experience what we know as the docile body. So there are, just like these, there are other bodily consequences that rise from people's literal or symbolic imprisonment. People's habitus and their tastes, etc., they express themselves as a result of their experiences and constraints that they've experienced in their past. Another example is that of men's sexuality and their generational habitus, and this is particularly in the context of gay men who are now in their 70s and 80s. Now, they have a very different relationship to their bodies because of the years of being closeted and marginalized if they did not perform the body practices of traditional heterosexual men. Leonard, Duncan, and Barrett, they introduce examples of the regulation of the social body, because as we start reading more about the chapter, or looking at what the author has to say, we look at what research is available on body matters and body practices, and what are important and should not be overlooked. So the perception of age is complex. For strangers, we are all seen, the first thing we see in anybody is their physicality. We look at the body, we see its signs of age, we see the ethnicity. It's not something that we intend to see, but it's right there, front and center. So we see signs of age, we see the individual, are they standing erect, are they a little stooped, do they have a visible disability, what color is their skin, what color is their hair. So this is what you see. While we don't want to respond to the visual cues themselves, that's what we see. For an aging man, the salt and pepper hair color, facial wrinkles, the way they move, they'll transmit age-related messages, as do their clothes. Men's perceived interpersonal age as late middle-aged or old often diverges from their felt age and self-image. And what that means basically is that the way we see other, or the way older men are viewed by strangers, is quite different from the way they view themselves. Bodily aging looks different to the outside than to the individual themselves. And there's a little quote in your book, which is from, I believe, Thompson, from the author himself. The way our body changes with aging is commonly framed in words such as, quote, "I'm in pretty good shape for my age," even if the man's appearance suggests otherwise. Meet a weathered-faced man in his late 60s who uses a cane, and he might confidently tell you he doesn't feel old. You think he looks it. What you do not know is that he has been using this cane for 30 years, ever since his horse stumbled and threw him in a steeplechase requiring several surgically implanted pins in his leg. Because he still works outdoors with horses, he is a trainer for race horses. His skin has a distinctive weathered look. His physical appearance is consistent with his livelihood and age, and his body image is consistent with his resilience and functional ability. So this is reflective. Okay, we have students come in. Okay. Sorry, I do get interrupted from time to time because there's either a pop-up in the chat window or a student accidentally getting booted out and coming back in and so on. So the perception of age is quite different between people experiencing the aging process itself in a bodily fashion and what they think they feel about their own age. Perspective matters. So strangers see only the body. When you don't know somebody, you see only their body. The old man who looks into the mirror, he doesn't necessarily see an old man facing himself. Perhaps sometimes when there's the reality of looking at oneself through several situational lenses, you might experience, or you might see yourself as an older person. But typically when an older man looks in the mirror, he's not seeing himself as an old person. Michelle has a question. Michelle, go ahead, please.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I was just wondering, so is it the perception of the individual that makes it so that they don't believe that they're as old as they are, or is it more of a denial thing?
I'm not sure it's a denial thing. It's more that the denial occurs after older men are made aware of their aging, and typically there are several things that make you aware of your aging. So I'll speak from personal experience. I don't typically tend to think of myself as an older person, but every once in a while in the mornings I wake up and my knees are sore, my shoulders are sore, and then I start thinking, oh my God, I didn't have this many years ago, I must be growing old. So the denial comes in typically as a defense to a self-acknowledgement or a recognition that either they themselves perceive themselves as old or somebody else may have pointed it out that you're old.
Okay.
So I don't think that's an instinctive reflex to deny that what you see in the mirror is an old person.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And I'll make that that example gets a little more clear now. So for example, most of us have some contact with an older person, older man, right? Either grandfather, father, uncle, granduncle, somebody. When we meet them every time, what is the first thing we see when we meet someone we love, someone close to us, an older man? What do we feel? What do we experience?
Happiness.
Happiness, okay. Evan?
I feel as if I notice like their well-being, like how they're if they're standing, like my grandfather wears a
Who said white hair and wrinkles? One sec, I'm just going to move this window down. Brian, do you notice white hair and wrinkles the first thing when you see your grandfather or someone older, your family member that you like?
Well, that's kind of the first way I like kind of understand, you know, how far aged he is, you know, like how's he health-wise. Because let's just say you see a grand relative or a really old person 6 months ago. 6 months ago, he might have looked younger than he was right now, and he would have been healthier. But now,
But when you see them, what's the first thing that strikes you? Does white hair, wrinkled face strike you first, or hey, that's grandpa? Does that strike you first?
because I know them interpersonally and I have that connection from before, like we're not strangers, I have that come into my mind first and then like the wrinkles and stuff after.
Right, and that's the point. So what happens is, to strangers, the first thing that strikes them is the gray hair, the wrinkles, the wheelchair, the cane. But when you see older men that you know, the age is there, it's always there, but that's not what you look at first. You look at the person first. You've taken the person out of the age. Does that make sense?
Yes.
We don't necessarily, we know they're older. I mean, there's nothing denying that. It's all out there. But for example, when I speak to my dad, my dad is 77. When I speak to him, you know, he's bald, and whatever is left of his hair is all gray. He's an old man. But when I see him, that's not the first thing I experience. The first thing I experience is dad, okay, or grandpa or uncle. Yeah, it's hard to miss. For example, if your father was ambulatorily capable, they were mobile, and all of a sudden they're in a wheelchair and you hadn't seen them in that period, yeah, you can't miss it. That's undeniable. But that's not the first thing that strikes older people that you know. You notice the mood, the relationship, the recognition comes first. Thank you, Teresa. Absolutely. That's what you first pick up on. You don't, you notice age, you notice expression, you notice the bodily stuff. Typically for strangers, for people you don't know, for and that's just how the mind works. If the first thing you notice, if when you notice an older person and the first thing you register is gray hair, old, disabled, and the last thing that comes to you is, hey, that's Uncle Joe, I don't know if that's accurate. So anyway, so yeah, the relationship comes first, then the recognition after. But it's, you know, the perspective, and that's what Thompson is talking about. So it's it's the same thing amongst friends. I have several older friends in their 70s and 80s, and I don't think I know they're old, obviously, because I know how old they are, but that's not the thing I see. The chat windows of Sarah, their humor, their history, their personality, their background that was built with them. So those are the things that come up. You notice the person, and the age. Age cannot be avoided. You will see it at different points, and it's ever present. Anyway, moving forward. So, sorry, I'm not sure what we're talking about. Perspective matters and settings matter. Erica, give me a second. Let's. Yep. All right. Go ahead, Erica.
So going back to what you said earlier, when they look into a mirror and they see themselves as younger, could it be that they're also seeing their humor, their relationship, their whole life, having that first initial reaction like we have when we look at our grandparents?
Well, think about what we see of ourselves when we look in the mirror. I'll tell you what I see. When I look in the mirror, I don't necessarily see a man. I don't necessarily see a professor. I don't see somebody with dark hair. I just see me. There's usually no words to describe what we see. We see ourselves, and if there's a change, we see the change in what we saw from ourselves from yesterday. But really, it actually goes beyond description as to what we see in the mirror, and we don't necessarily put it into words. I don't think when I look into the mirror, I see that, oh, I'm a man, look, my hair is starting to turn gray, I'm developing some male pattern baldness, A, B, and C, and the other thing. That's not typically what I see when I look in the mirror. I just see me. So why should it be any different for an older adult who looks at himself in the mirror? Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
No problem. Chloe, you're next.
I was just thinking it related to what you was just saying about the kind of natural progression and how they don't really see the changes until it happens, like pain or discomfort. I guess it's kind of the same for a family who just see this steady progression of aging, and then it's more noticeable when something happens. Say if my grandpa was more physically frail or limping, that would be something that I would highlight instantly.
Yeah, so until grandpa is actually in pain or suffering, they're simply grandpa. They're another person who's part of your life, correct?
Yes, thank you.
Yep, no, that's exactly what it is. It's the absence of being a stranger that takes the age component away. Joan, you're next. Hi, Joan. Oh, okay. Well, perhaps we'll ask Brian. Brian, you have your hand raised. Did you want to share something?
It's more of like I want to get something straight. So we're talking about how if we know an older person that's not a stranger, we immediately recognize a relationship and the kind of bond we have together, right? So I just want to know, like, what if you know, like, a person, let's just say you know an older person, but the way you perceive them is not the same anymore because of the relationship constraint you have. Would that affect the way you perceive them? Like, if you're in a good relationship with them, you see them as this happy, jolly, loving kind of person, and the way you view them physically would be like, oh, he's like a younger, more enthusiastic kind of individual. But like, if it's somebody that you know and you don't have a really good relationship with them, and you really have a bad, let's just say, perception of who they are, you'd probably have a bad perception of their physicality. Would that be a thing?
So it's a complex thing. When I say that you notice the person first and the physicality after, it's not that you don't notice the physicality itself. The physicality is always present. It's hard to miss, but it's just not the first thing that occurs to you. Now, if it's a person with who you do not have a positive relationship, and the physicality is again, it's still omnipresent. Our mind tends to sequence what it wants to see in priorities. It's very possible for the mind to see an older person that you don't like, and somebody who perhaps you feel has done you harm, to see them in a very negative light and see their physicality as front and center.
Okay, I'm here. Joan is here.
Hi, Joan. How are you?
Okay, sorry, I was having a hard time unmuting the computer. Okay, so to me, when I see an elderly person, what first came to mind is basically what we would call a stereotype. If that person was well groomed, how that person looked, then you say to yourself, okay, this person look mature, they have age, wisdom that they have accumulated, they have something to offer to the younger generation, versus if they are maybe a homeless person and you said to yourself, oh, what did he do with his life all these years? So basically it's like a two-way street. It's like how they are presented make you look at them in a certain way.
Right, and so yes, well, you are going to look at, but you're still looking at their physicality, their presentation, right? If it's a homeless older person, you're looking at the tattered clothes, you're looking at the stereotypical cart with cans that they're collecting to get a few dollars. You're looking, you're perceiving smell coming from their wrinkled clothes and so on, typical signs of homelessness. But and the same goes for a well-groomed older man. You look at the nice suit, they clearly look fashionable, they look wealthy, they look like they can afford stuff. And that's, but still, this is all the physicality we see in strangers. What if it was someone you knew? So, for example, if someone you knew and you were very close to, if they were an older person with tattered clothes, they smelled bad, looked like they'd been having a lot of alcohol, your first response, while you are affected by the physicality, you can't avoid it, your first response is to go up to the person and ask, hey, is everything okay? What's going on, right? All the physicality and all the signs, while being present, are still out of the window.
That's true.
Right? So, and that's the point. The thing is, we often see strangers for how they present themselves. But for people that we know, that identity is secondary to the initial, the connection you have with them. And that's what Tree was trying to say as well.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
No problem. Sarah?
Hi, I just had a quick point to add to that is I just thought of my kids, children being so honest, whereas when they see their grandparents, there's that relationship, so they'll run up to them and be like, oh, grandma, but then they'll say, okay, well, grandma's old. But then when they're in the grocery store and they might see an older adult, they might be more standoffish and kind of hide behind me and, be like, who's that?
So even when your kids, like all our children, when they see their grandparents, yes, they recognize. So it's not like you recognize one thing and the other has gone away.
Yeah.
They're both there. But when grandma opens the door, it's not that an old person is opening the door. It's grandma.
Yeah.
Right? So and that's what the author is getting at. It's the same thing with friends. You have so a lot of us have older friends. We see the friend first and then all the physicality after. Brian, did you have a follow-up question or a comment of some sort?
Oh yeah, I understand this now. Like, I just want to say this is not how I really perceive my grand relatives. That was just like an answer that came to my mind. I see them as a relationship first before I noticed.
Yeah, and what happens is it is a lecture. So we say things, and then often what I think I've said clearly. Sometimes there is a little. So it's a good thing that people put their hands up and ask questions, and then we get to clarify and get to discuss. That's the whole point. So it's all good. Okay. All right. So again, speaking about how people are perceived, how older men are perceived, friendships and familiar places provide old men a relevant context for their aged body to be unimportant. So for example, I have mentioned this before. I play tennis with a bunch of people ranging from their 30s to their 70s. There are a whole bunch of people who are retired in their late 50s, 60s. When I meet them, I only see Brian, or I only see Rock or Mark or whatever it is. I know they're older. I mean, it's unavoidable, right? So, and it's very similar. Sometimes unfamiliar settings will remind people of their age, and that's typical. When so the example in your textbook is Ted. An older adult, 71 years old. He was encouraged to take yoga lessons to help with his hip osteoarthritis. But the challenge is that yoga is perceived as an activity and a suitable exercise for females in North America. So it's a very North American thing, Canada and US, that yoga classes tend to be predominantly female. So he did start up at the local yoga center, but he quit pretty soon because he could not find yoga for old stiff guys. So we all prefer to congregate with our own peers. So it was there is that challenge when your body and your bodily difference becomes front and present to ourselves or to the older adult themselves. So often what happens is, sorry, we should back up just a little bit because these were not supposed to pop up. I was trying to access the chat window and then a whole bunch of different things popped up. That is fine. Okay. So there's a disparity between one's outward appearance and what we feel for age. And what Featherstone and Hepworth, they propose, they call this the mask of aging construct. They argue that people see their body aging as a troubling camouflage. So for example, if if I'm say X number of years and I feel that I feel exactly the same like I felt in my 20s, it's troublesome that my body does not reflect how I feel. So it's actually troubling camouflage because it projects an image which is different from how the older man sees himself. I often talk to my dad about this over the phone. So, my dad's 75 years old. So I ask him, hey, how you doing? He says, I feel good. So, and oftentimes he'll comment about the fact that I don't think I've changed since I was a young man. My body has changed. I've had a couple heart attacks and a stroke, but I don't think any differently. And it's amazing that how people's bodies age and how they feel about themselves can be very, very different. So that's why the body is considered as a troublesome camouflage. There's a beautiful book by an author called Deepak Chopra. If any of you are interested in some light reading, it's not super philosophical. It's very well written. You can listen to it as an audiobook as well. It's called Ageless Body and Timeless Mind. So the mind doesn't sense that time has passed. The mind continues to remain in a continuum, and it kind of perceives or it wishes for the body to be ageless. The body might not actually be. And the whole, it's a book, so I'm oversimplifying what the book has. Feel free to go ahead and read it. It's a wonderful book. Anyway, so what happens with aging is the outer body is essentially a betrayal of the youthfulness of the inner body. And this paradox is referred to as the ghost in the machine, where a younger feeling ghost inhabits an older machine or the body. And this is cited by Gibson in 2000. This masculinist discourse about the body as a machine, it goes back to the early 1900s. When industrialization and modernity were in their middle phases, so to speak. So in 1991, Featherstone and Hepworth, they talk about masking. So this is the example you have, which is from your textbook, is when asked at the age of 79 to describe what it felt like to be old, the author J.B. Priestley replied, It is as though walking down Shaftesbury Avenue as a fairly young man, I was suddenly kidnapped, rushed into a theater, and made to don the gray hair, the wrinkles, and the older attributes of age, then wheeled on stage. Behind the appearance of age, I am the same person with the same thoughts as when I was younger. And this is an incredible statement. And, you know, it completely resonates with me because of my conversations with my father. Typically, older men and old men do not necessarily feel that they're old unless they're constantly reminded by by the physicality of pain or discomfort or medical diagnosis or hospital visits. Several older men who are relatively healthy don't believe that they've necessarily changed from when they have been younger men. When several people aged between 59 to 86 were asked, do you think of yourself as old? This research was done by Thompson, by the author and his colleagues. They discovered that nearly 7 out of 8, I wish they'd done a percentage, but anyway, you can do the math if you want. 7 out of 8 replied no. This is not surprising, because when you look at subjective age, other people have studied subjective age. Subjective age is not real chronological age. It's a sense of how you feel your age is. So Rubin and Bernstein found in 2006 that from midlife onwards, individuals feel about 20% younger than their actual age. This pattern of denial, and we speak about denial too, so we're not going to deny speaking about denial. So this pattern of denial of being old, as the author prefers, is a very general pattern where norms make the assumption that a person is of a certain age or old, but individuals typically reject those assumptions. When old people declare, or when they say, I don't feel old, I feel young inside, what they're basically trying to say is that they don't identify with the false stereotype of what an old person is commonly supposed to be. Okay, so the self-perception of aging, in the absence of constant reminders itself, is for the mind essentially to be sort of ageless and timeless. There is a gap, obviously. I mean, this is between what older men feel about their age and what, you know, what time does to their physicality and their bodies. So people obviously look at themselves and start to ask, am I really old? And this is a question that is approached by many old people. There is obviously pervasive ageism in our culture. So it's not uncommon for old men to talk about different narratives that distance them from their aged bodies and from old age. So for example, there's an example in a textbook of older adults who are living with multiple chronic conditions. And one old man who was age 76 years old had 8 chronic conditions. Eight sounds like a lot. But even in his opinion, he says, I don't feel old, even though I'm going on 77, I don't really feel old. I still think I'm 50. Similarly, another man, who was interviewed in the Sturgis motorcycle rally in South Dakota, he says, age is in your body. It's mostly in your mind. You really don't age all that much. So there are other terms that we're going to expose you all to. It's bridging and masquerading. So the gap between what is hidden, what is your felt age, unfortunately for older men, that's not the visible part. So what is hidden and what is actually seen, or what is present, is regularly bridged. So it's so in 2004, Biggs, what he suggested that masquerading is actually doing one's felt age. So for example, older men in, I don't know, their 50s, 60s, 70s continue to pursue activities as they did in younger years, maybe skiing, maybe playing tennis, maybe horse riding, snowshoeing, or remaining in the labor force by choice. Okay, so although there is one could argue that being involved in all of these activities reconstitutes or keeps the person's identity going, the author wants to bring in the idea that this is essentially an older body pursuing younger activities as a method of masquerading or pretending to be younger. So this kind of supposedly purposeful social masking becomes particularly pronounced when when a group or an individual becomes socially excluded from sources of place and esteem. So when older men start getting marginalized from workplaces, they start to pursue, apparently, as per this author, start to pursue many of these activities that kind of reconstitute their feeling of their younger self. This social masking or masquerading in intergenerational context is a way of protesting, or is a rebuff against ageism, against the stigma of age. A similar example is something we spoke about yesterday when we spoke about the Australian pharmaceutical sales reps who essentially, while they recognized they were older and they capitalized at using to sell some of the older and more applicable drugs to customers, they continued to remain in the workforce, and they were essentially masquerading their age. So what Biggs argues is that social masking is not necessarily the pursuit of an ageless adulthood or a never-ending masculinity. Basically, it is the agency that people use to resist the negative stereotypes or of overtones of ageism and the prescriptive norms of social clocks and so on. So one of the wonderful things about most workplaces in Canada is that there are no age limits. So you can work till you're able. You are able to retire at 65, but there's really no requirement for you to have to retire at 65. Which is wonderful. It's anti-ageist and it's absolutely appropriate. I have an uncle who is a patent examiner in Washington, D.C., and he is 76. He's still actively employed. So in his mind, he is still his younger self. He's still able to work well, and he's happy to do what he's doing. But his body obviously is that of a 77-year-old. So according to Biggs, he'd essentially be masquerading by performing tasks of his younger self. And I don't know if I like this term so much, but it is in the chapter, so I want to introduce the concept to you. Teresa, go ahead, Teresa.
Yeah, so I was going to say that I'm very uncomfortable with that term as well, because it seems like we're saying they're pretending and resisting, but maybe they just like what they're doing and their bodies are still allowing them to do it.
Yeah, and I would say to that I don't like the term myself, because it seems what they're doing is how they're feeling. To put a label such as masquerading it's almost a pejorative.
Yeah, I agree. That's how it feels to me anyway.
Yeah, and if you folks go through the chapter and you think differently, or you think that my interpretation, Teresa's interpretation, is not how the author intended to be, please let us know. I'd love to know, and I'd love for the class to know. But at least that's how I interpret what Biggs is saying. Not a big fan of that section, but again, it's a concept, and we have to be aware that certain concepts exist, whether we agree with them or not. We have two more people with raised hands. I'm not ignoring people. Chloe, go ahead, please.
I was just thinking, or relating it to what you were saying yesterday about kind of a successful and unsuccessful aging.
Yes.
I guess places the pressure on people to feel like they must be doing better and achieving more, and like, I guess, be more independent.
Yeah, so the successful prescription of successful, the prescription of optimal, the prescription of all of these different terms, they demand that people age and do certain things a certain way as they get older. And would masquerading fit in with any of that? Yeah, probably. I mean, if you're if in principle, I'm going to reject the term masquerading as to how I feel about the process, but we are still talking about that lens. So if we apply the lens of masquerading, a person who continues to remain engaged in the workforce, has a good identity at work, would, according to Biggs, be quote unquote masquerading. But at the same time, because of all these different identities, they would have good social well-being. And according to the other models of quote unquote successful or optimal aging, they would be very successful and aging well because there are many things in their life that are going according to written script. So that would kind of sort of make the connection for me that way. But I don't necessarily see that we have to connect the two, but if that's how you wanted to organize it for yourself, I mean, no harm in that. Does that make sense, Chloe?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. Okay, we don't have any more hands, so I'm going to go ahead and continue. Okay, so there we go. So a little more about masquerading. The author talks about Scandinavian research suggests that masquerading may begin in men's mid-30s. So people as early as their 30s typically try to perform actions of men 10 years younger than their chronological age. In a study of Midwestern US grandparents, Kaufman and Elder found an average that a 60-year-old man felt 54 and a 70-year-old man felt 62 years old and an 80-year-old man felt 70 years old. This pattern shows that as men get older, they progressively feel younger than they are. And this pair of studies jointly suggests that social masking is very likely a long-standing experience that many old men who feel younger are probably as active as they feel. So I don't know, there is a lot of discussion and there's several researchers using the term masquerading itself, but perhaps there might be a different way to present this concept and talk about it a little differently. The way our society is constructed, the lack of openness by wearing a mask or not disclosing who you truly are is seen as a lack of openness, a lack of transparency, and deceptive. And so with that contextual framework, anything that suggests the absence of transparency, such as masquerading, is seen in a negative light. And that's what makes this conversation about masquerading feel negative. And I don't know how, I suppose it could be discussed better or more suitably by the author by talking about felt age versus chronological age. I think that's a better way to discuss people continuing to pursue activities that is not typical for their physical age. And that might be a better way to do it. Anyway, that's for when I write my book, but at the moment, no. Sorry. Okay. So based on Briggs' theorizing, there is masquerading. There is genuine masquerading as well, where people do try to act and behave younger, not because they like a certain thing, but because they are viewed differently when they pursue a certain subset of activities. So the author suggests that whenever an aging man wears a social mask to maintain a particular self-presentation, for example, a 67-year-old retired carpenter, he gives the example of a carpenter called Matt. He's 67 years old. He trims his thick graying biker beard, or a 71-year-old administrator who dyes his hair to hide the gray. Each man is engaging in what he calls quote unquote body work. So these body work is practices undertaken to modify the appearance within your social world. It's a matter of identity management and preservation of what is known as masculine capital. Now, in postmodern times, it is, there's more recognition that people are individuals, and there's more recognition now. We're in postmodern times, so there's more recognition now that people basically construct their body to support their own identity, and it's not necessarily to very strict written scripts and how they feel about themselves. So that's a good positive change. The others in his social groups, so even when older men change their appearance, do body work to look how they feel about it, the old carpenter Matt, he might be a member of an internet-based brotherhood of graybeard bikers. Apparently their goal is to enjoy the biker lifestyle, so he's participating in an activity which is typically would have pursued when he was younger. And even with all that body work, when he's part of the group, the perception is that he's just himself. So within that context, what typically happens is they recognize that while they might be doing different body work to represent what they think of themselves as younger people, it is something that allows them to be who they are, and it preserves, in certain contexts, the masculine capital that they have. So the author goes on to talk about postmodern identities, and one of he talks about 66-year-old New England janitor Stan, who he interviewed for a study, and he had been unable to ride because he had severely ruptured his bicep, and he hoped to ride again in a year. Now, Stan, the way he embodied his lifestyle, even though he was not riding, he had several forearm tattoos. He maintained his full, thick goatee and often wore stars and stripes bandana at work. So it's that was his identity. It's not that I'm an old man. His identity was I'm a biker. He commented, "I miss riding. The only good news, though, is because I'm big. Supervisors expect me to be the mule lifting and carrying furniture." And of course, his identity is of this big, tough guy who rides bikes, right? And he keeps his bandana on and all that stuff. Of course, he can't physically do any of these things because his body has changed. So, on the cover of the April 2013 Gerontologist magazine is a photo of a very fit, balding, 70-plus-year-old appliance technician with his gray goatee. His name's Zip. This is, he rode from his home in Dallas, Texas, to the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally in South Dakota. For those of you who don't know, this is a very big motorcycle rally in South Dakota. Recently, with the COVID pandemic, it was hoped that they would cancel this rally, but they still had it anyway. And interestingly, there are several thousand motorcyclists from all over the US, and typically Canada also, until the borders were closed. Of course, this time it's led to lots of other issues, such as a lot of COVID spread because lots of people weren't wearing masks. And anyway, that's the context of the Sturgis motorcycle rally itself. But the men who show up at these rallies, a lot of them are older adults, and they don't necessarily see themselves that way. And that's the point that's being made here, that neither does Zip, and all of them see themselves as bikers, that men with motorcycles. It's the social world of men with motorcycles. So because of their continuities of their lives and their embodiment of being older men, they typically, that goes unremarked unless they make some passing social comparisons to men who they consider less fit, or they laugh at the fact at how they need to stop more often to take bathroom breaks. Similarly, when you look at meanings and experiences of road bicycling amongst predominantly white middle-class aging men, not very dissimilar to the bikers' experience. The road cycling men lived a lifestyle that, in which they enjoyed the camaraderie of cycling, the joy of the ride, and feeling well and feeling fit. And it was their own way of resisting as long as possible, but then adjusting to the limitations of their bodily aging. Kendra?
Yes, hello. I'm not sure if I missed it, but if you can maybe elaborate on what bridging is. I wanted to compare the difference.
Oh, we didn't talk about bridging. So it's part of a whole section. Bridging is to, they don't necessarily talk much about bridging. Bridging is, so when masquerading is completely not acknowledging what the age itself is. Bridging is more of, for example, if you were an older adult and you were engaged in active cycling and active competition when you were younger, you would cycle 100 kilometers, you'd come back, that would be your day-to-day routine. Now, maintaining that 100-kilometer riding identity when you're 65 and with some osteoarthritis, maybe a couple other comorbidities, might be a challenge. So there is no way you can actually masquerade. Correct? So in that situation, lots of older adults will still continue to participate in the activity, perhaps with a peer group. So they continue to engage in the activity at lesser intensity. So this is considered bridging, where they are still maintaining an identity that relates to their earlier practice, but it's not necessarily at the same intensity and same level as they used to do when they were younger.
Okay, so just to confirm, so for bridging, it's not at the same level of intensity, but masquerading is?
Masquerading is not necessarily doing it at the same intensity either. Masquerading is continuing to do what you are without necessarily, which it looks like you're representing what you're doing when you're younger. It may or may not be the same. It may have no connection with that.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
No problem. Yeah, they don't spend a lot of time about bridging. I had to find documents on bridging separately. It's not there in your chapter. So thank you for raising that, because of course I spoke about it and then didn't speak about it at all. Okay, so I'm not sure where we are. Okay, there we go. So in popular culture, there's an increase in images of the white body, and there are a couple. When we think about the white male body, okay, now don't overthink this. When we think of the white male body, think of some keywords that pop up to your mind. What do we think of? You don't have to raise your hand. You can jump in and say for this particular question, white male body or just male body. What are we thinking of?
Automatically, I think of a bigger build. So not necessarily big, but just like broader shoulders, more defined features, just like a sharper jawline.
Nice. Yes, very true. So prominent features, good bone structure, broad frame. Henry says muscles. Melissa says muscles. Yes, 100%. So that's what we're thinking of. Skinny, tall. Yes, possibly. Yes, why not? I guess it depends on what each individual's male ideal is in terms of. We have one more chat in the chat window, but then after that, I'm just, oh, my slideshow isn't behaving like it should, but that's We have 3 more comments in the chat window. I'm just going to read them and then I'm going to go. Depends on the region, environment, and many factors. Anything but curly hair. Okay. Light features. Okay. So when we think about the male body, there are several images that come up. A lot of people said muscles and fitness and vigor. Yeah, that's the male desirable ideal in most Western societies. So there is this discursive ideal, and this is unmistakable by, you can't miss it. This is how men are presented on the covers of men's magazines, and how they're represented in women's magazines. The prototypical young man mimics the classical body of the youthful Greek god Adonis, a symbol of masculine beauty. So over the past 30 years, male bodies in popular magazines have remained youthful in appearance, and they've become more lean, more muscular, and more V-shaped. This image basically it's an eroticized aesthetic. It's showing a toned young body. Very few men aged 65 and older have Adonis bodies. And most have never had an Adonis body. So the representational masculinity in media can create photographic mythscapes. It can, on one hand, there's a prevailing imaginary where flabby old men serve as comic relief. So, you have a little bit chubby older people, or somewhat overweight older people, and they serve as they're usually the funny guys in movies. Their physical aging is as comical as their grumbling and stumbling, and they don't represent the body ideals of manhood. And they may be often portrayed as going downhill or going to pot, or old goats and old farts. On the other hand, the irony is of the limited portrayals of men in late and later life in most media representations, whether it's magazines, films, video, television, you don't see a large range of older men that are not, that's not expressed in an ageist or negative masculinist sense. Based on an early study of British television, Rodwell and colleagues, they basically concluded that there was a tendency to present a selective view of old age that played down the possible connections between old age, disability, ill health, and death. I think I may have a comment, or someone joined class. I don't know. Let's see. Oh, there's a comment. There we go. Chat window. Yes, Joan says, reality, the old male body is not the same as what the society's, I don't know if it's portrays or what it sees, or how advertisements are created and how it's presented. Sorry, I don't know where, I think I spoke a lot about masquerading as a performance and switching between different masks. So that's when we talk about people switching their identities between being an electrician and a motorcycle rider, and the context of the body being. So that's something we discussed before, and I'm a little offset on my slideshow, and I'm not sure why. But anyway, so we just spoke about the eroticized physical ideal and the disparity between mythscapes, how the body is presented in reality. So don't worry too much about it. We've covered everything. It's just that these bullet points should have come up in coincidence with the examples I was presenting before. Anyway, now in men's magazines, advertising, and interest stories, old men are typically non-existent. Even when they're occasionally present, what happens is they are always represented as very fit, very fashionable. So they're portrayed in a very favorable light. And what the old men portray in magazine advertisements is that their masculinities are never aging. They show old men typically as participating in somewhat vigorous activities, being fit, enjoying one thing or the other, which is true of several old men. That's not untrue. But masculinities are so diverse that only seeing old men of a certain type, it's a dichotomy. Either you see old men who are dissatisfied with their sex lives, and then you have the advertisement for erectile dysfunction, or you have them suffering from aches and pains and having their back. It depends on who's doing the advertising. If it's a pharmaceutical industry, it's that way. If it is a lifestyle selling industry, then it's these older men who are enjoying themselves on cruises. They're canoeing, kayaking, they're swimming, they're horse riding, they're skiing. So the portrayal is never representative. Old men portrait is mostly seen negatively in the society. Michelle, I'm just going to say that it goes both ways. I don't watch a lot of television advertisements. I actually don't have live television, but advertisements pop up online as well. I think it's dichotomous. There's nothing in between. You have the advertisements showing old men as being victims and suffering, or you have the never-ending masculinity ideal where old men are doing all of these amazing things all of the time. And really, there's a broad range of people who are in between, and that's the majority of old men. So even, old men's representations in visual and textual media may not all be negative. And old men's bodies are nearly always hidden in advertisements. There are very few advertisements where you have old men with their upper body exposed or whatever it is. They're clothes. And there's an analysis of the advertising industry's war with the aging body and with the age itself. And so Katz and Marshall suggest the industry has constructed portrayals of a senior, of an older adult who's independent, healthy, sexy, flexi retired citizen. So so the portrayal is, and now we're talking about the leisure industry, the lifestyle industry. So sorry, I'm interrupting for a chat message. The positive advert is when it benefits the advertisers. That's true, Michelle. So yeah, so the senior typically is shown in this as independent, healthy, and sexy, and retired, well-to-do senior. It doesn't necessarily represent all old men. Men no older than late middle age personify the poses that aging men need to not look old. So the media representation is emphasizing that you don't look old, and it marks many times it doesn't show old men as having wrinkles, lines, spots, sagging skin, and larger bellies. Now, rarely is a man's experience of his aging body directly addressed outside of the heteronormative comedy representation with a reputation of dating quote unquote girls. And we're going to watch this movie tomorrow, and Something's Gotta Give. Why is it tomorrow? I don't know if we're seeing Something's Gotta Give tomorrow or on Thursday. We will use that film to look at representation of old men as well as sexuality expectations and so on. So that's got a slightly different context, multiple contexts to it. But if those of you who have seen the movie with Jack Nicholson, he's an older man, 63-year-old Harry, who has a reputation of dating much younger women, about a third his age. There are a few exceptions in media representations. For example, in the 2006 film Venus, the role of Peter O'Toole, where he's actually embodying the wisdom of being an old man and the physical frustrations of being old. So within the lived aging body, and maybe the shame of it typically being ignored in cultural representation, this kind of neglect, does it impact bodily experiences? So this is a question that the author has. And the answer is, of course, I mean, because the body itself, even though men live in it, it's largely ignored. So there is some shame because it doesn't really match up to the ideal that's being presented in media. Bodies are judged by others and in turn by us. When the physical signs of aging are masked in films and in print, so they're hidden, and representative old men's bodies are covered in clothes, the embarrassment or the revulsion of looking at an aging naked body is kind of assuaged or kind of addressed or blocked. The aesthetics of never-aging masculinities are constantly encouraged by media. They're not necessarily endorsed by old men themselves. This is the media trying to pitch a certain picture. For example, if you look at the work of Ward and Holland, what they studied was the expected self-image dilemmas associated with graying, thinning hair. They found that very few British men touched upon the topic of self-presentation and appearance at all when discussing discrimination in later life. So it's, you know, in a sample of Finnish and US men, they noticed that the majority of men rejected the consumerist strategies focusing on aesthetics. They found it unnatural and they found it inauthentic to masculinity practices. Particularly men from the working class, they favored their natural aging bodies and they preferred maintaining physical functioning rather than preserving their looks as per media recommendations. This kind of change in looks was not important for a bunch of men, Swedish men that were studied also. There were two reasons, apparently, according to Oberg. The proportion of men who think they look masculine begins to diminish very slowly as from when you're in your 20s. 3/4 of the men aged 65 to 74 believed that they, looked masculine, despite their age. And even more than half of the oldest men who were more than 75 years old in this particular study perceived themselves as looking masculine. So the study's findings were that looking masculine, it's not limited to Swedish men, and it does not outweigh their own sense of self in looking masculine. It's men feel less masculine typically when their strength, they notice a decline in their strength, their flexibility, their stamina. That starts. So it's men respond to the change in functionality as when they start to experience feeling old. Basically, wrinkles, hair color, and saggy necks don't tend to be demasculating, as according to this study at least, for most men. But the loss of body capacity can actually remind men that they are getting older and they start to feel older. And another study in larger numbers since 2013 study, when they talk about study middle-aged men talking about their bodies, they have a comment from a 55-year-old man who says until you're 45, you just think your body is going to be as receptive as it always is. But when aging starts to happen, you just go, oh, you just have to start working harder and staying where you are and not go backwards. So it's more an experienced form of bodily aging than internalizing all of these messages that media tends to pop out at older men. Now, there's a little bit of overlap between masquerading, bridging, masking, and obviously there's a lookism in communities. There are several professions where the physical appearance is prioritized, and looking a certain way is absolutely essential to be able to work in those kinds of jobs. It used to be that you had to look a certain way to be on television. Ageism is not as overt as it used to be. But the obligation to make your body look pretty or appear younger is more common amongst old gay men. So there's a term for that. They call it lookism. And in gay communities, there's an emphasis on appearance, as per studies from Jones and Pugh. There's a lookism sexual culture, apparently. So there's an obligation to negotiate body aesthetics amongst men who depended on their look for work. An example is in Japan, men who are aged 60 to 65 are pushed out of their employment in large companies to make room for younger generations. And the old men who want to re-enter the workforce in smaller companies must manage to look quote unquote fit. There's really no age limit. If you're healthy, you can work. I mean, that's the impression they have, but they still needed to look the part. So the third age is cultural aesthetic obligation might also occur amongst working class old men who work in construction and know that their older body has changed as compared to their younger body. And any perceived erosion of their body capacity can lead to worries about them gaining or retaining employment. So the men often will mask their aging body by chewing handfuls of ibuprofen and wearing flexible knee sleeves. And this is all of this is reported in literature as well. Sorry. Men's body image becomes of less importance with age, but the bodily processes that affect functionality and being able to work as though you're younger, those seem to be what they want to negotiate the most. So the graying hair, the sagging skin, they're not really addressed unless it starts to affect their employment or their position in a certain social setting. So obviously, this is a comment from an older adult. I'm not looking forward to having less stamina, quite definitely. I don't know whether the fact that I do find hills steeper than I used to, I don't know whether that's because I've been sedentary for the last 5 or 6 years or whether my doctor said it's the aging process. If I thought I was going to err, if my stamina was going to degrade as fast as it has in the last 5 years, I'd be pretty distressed. So in general, there are lower appearance anxieties. It's more functionality that men seem to be concerned about. In a nuanced quantitative study, Rebison and colleagues, what they find that old men in the US value body function more than body appearance, and they theorize that men's personal criteria for body evaluation, it self-adjusts with age, shifting more and more towards function and more away from appearance, as long as functional capacity could be taken for granted. So this is more characteristic of able-bodied aging white men's experiences of aging, because aging African-American men were more satisfied with their body function and appearance than apparently white men. Now, interestingly, sorry, there we go. Okay, we're good. So there are situations where it's absolutely impossible to maintain functionality, and it really affects how one perceives their physical self. And that is in situations where there is the optics of impairment. That could be a physical disability, losing a limb, neuropathy, you have a part of something amputated or non-functional because of, say, type 2 diabetes, unmanaged type 2 diabetes, or say you have something like Parkinson's disease, which causes uncontrollable tremors, a general lack of control. So what Solmeo found in, oh, we are past our break time. Nicholas has just entered. You know what we're going to do now is we are at 10:30. I like to stick with my breaks. I know we have a little bit of this chapter to finish. We'll go ahead and do that after the break. We'll have a 15-minute health break now. So go ahead, stretch your legs, go to the bathroom. We'll finish up, and then we will address chapter 4. Okay? So any quick questions before the break that you want me to address? Or are we all good? Oops, sorry, I'll just go back a little. Okay, so we will see everybody back. It's 10:35 now. We'll see everybody back at 10:50, and then we will go on to about 12:15, and then we'll break for the afternoon. All right, see you all in about 15 minutes. I guess my microphone is actually turned on this time. Okay, so we spoke about the optics of impairment, and from interviews with Australian white men aged 55 and older, what Smith and colleagues noted that while physical functioning was important for supporting aging men's independent state of being, it affected how the men discursively positioned themselves as men. The researchers in this study, they concluded that men worry about body malfunction and the loss of bodily capacity and how this might affect their physical and masculine capital. From a very different vantage point, the message is still the same, that old men worry about their end of lives in terms of being a burden or needing help and feeling the impotency of a drawn out death or being weak, being sequestered. So that seems to be the primary concern. These different studies basically show that bodily aging is troubling for most heterosexual men when independence is jeopardized. But both gay and aging men feel the effects of bodily aging on their appearances based on what the norms of their class are and what the generational narratives are. So to summarize, bodies are ultimately seen as an ultimate personal resource for men that they make use of to retain their masculine capital, to negotiate, to accommodate, to resist, and to contest ageism, and manage potential demasculation. The physicality, the corporeality of aging, the material changes that come about over a lifetime, they occur unevenly among men. No two 65-year-olds will age the same way physically. And it's uneven amongst men in general, but there are some disparities based on class or on race as well, which are more of a group effect. Bodies bear meanings about social location, and they represent class, ethnicity, which seem to be quite consequential. Men from different classes tend to develop distinctive masculinity, body practices, and orientations, and it affects how their bodily aging occurs. Now, one of the things we did discuss earlier in this lecture is that there's very limited study on the role of the aging body in men itself, other than the medical aspect of it, where that's been done to death and been advertised to death by the companies that are researching how to extend a never-aging masculinity. And finally, within all the studies, it's quite obvious that functionality trumps appearance almost all of the time for aging men. They really start to experience and feel old when there are things that they physically can't do to keep up. So that summarizes chapter 3, which is titled in your textbook as Our Corporeality. Now, we'll do a little 5-minute window for you to ask questions regarding this chapter and the content that we spoke about. But other than that, if there aren't too many, then I would like to move on to chapter 4, which is Bodies, Habitus, and Age. Do we have questions? Okay, so that's fine. We will go ahead and move on to the next section. I don't think we have any more here. So this is a quote from Turner. We have bodies, but are also in a specific sense, we are bodies. Our embodiment is a necessary requirement of our social identification. So Gittins and Turner, they use Bourdieu's works to argue that the body and the self-emerged self in postmodern times, they're projects, they're actively being changed, they're being worked on. Anything that's a project means work is happening on it all the time. So this project, the body project, is ongoing. It's a co-determined creation, right, by the individual and by society. It's a co-determined creation that remains socially and personally crafted throughout life, through midlife, through later life as well. Before modernity, bodies were essentialized and adorned according to local cultural traditions. So that goes back to the essential theory, well, where being a certain way, a certain physicality is required to accomplish certain roles. And it was the different male body was treated differently in different cultures. By late modernity, of course, because of the rising authority of social and global conventions over the local, men and women are constrained differently. They're expected to now cultivate bodies that personify the likings of their generation, their class position, their ethnic background and sexuality, and their age. So in this lecture and in chapter 4, the focus shifts from aging bodies to old men's experiences with their bodily aging. And so the author begins with a summary of Bourdieu's concepts, dispositions, which is part of the habitus. When you think about habitus, it's preferences, dispositions, habits, and so on. So he talks about connecting the habitus with the bodily experience of aging itself. It's hard to ignore that there's a lot of biomedicalization and that presentation of aging, even on TV advertisements. Now we're talking about the other side of the non-ideal body, which we spoke about a few minutes ago. So a lot of older men are represented as being part of a happy couple in ads for Viagra or Cialis, or having recovered from some kind of ache or pain with Bengay balm or whatever it is, different pain relievers. So there's a lot of biomedicalization of aging. And well, most men do amend their health habits as they slowly grow older. The author observes that most old men don't fret too much about how later life transformations affect their masculine identities. They know subjectively they're still men, but men who are growing old. As far as Bourdieu is concerned, the body is always unfinished, whether it's always a project, whether it's a social project or as a physical entity. Now, Bourdieu himself doesn't talk much about the aging body itself or what exactly becomes the body project for aging men. But Schilling observed that he observed this about Bourdieu. Bourdieu argues that as working class taste is formed in contexts in which its members have little time free from necessity, they develop an instrumental orientation to the body. The body is a means to an end. So, and this is typical when you think about blue collar men in blue collar jobs. They spend most of their lives in hard physical work, and there's not much thought put to what the body needs to look like. It's more like it helps accomplish different goals. The body is a means to an end. In contrast, the tastes of the dominant class, wealthy people, white-collar individuals, they develop in spaces marked by greater distance from necessity, and the body is an end in itself. So then they treat the body differently. And this is a very profound thought. And when you start to make the bifurcation between people who need to work physically for a living as to people who really don't. So essentially, when there's greater distance from necessity, the body is treated as an end in itself, and class division results in differences in taste and orientations to the body. And they are obviously reformed in cultural and economic capital and available spare time. So Bourdieu's argument basically maintains that there are many sources of habitus that are incorporated into people's aging trajectories, which affects their materiality and experience of aging. So, for example, physical or corporeal aging for men who are not white or able-bodied and don't have much disposable income occurs earlier because your body is exposed to more physical stress and strain without time to recuperate. This is also if you're not able-bodied, if you're not white, there's a nested way in which lesser access to capital operates as a force. So it affects how people adopt toward their bodies and how social practices differentially expose their bodies to wear and tear. Typically, men in subordinate positions, which means in lower class or of different ethnicities, they typically have less time and fewer resources to engage in practices that help maintain, the body that is supposed to be healthy as per standards, or how it's presented in consumer culture. Men's positions regulate what kind of food is available to them and what they can afford, and what access they have to different resources. Sometimes, despite having access to resources, some men's bodies will result in developing a basketball belly because of an acquired habitus of eat well and let yourself go. So, put simply, bodies are contextually made and remade throughout the lifespan as men experience aging. The body that we see, the observable body for individuals, is the material result of all of their experiences. There's a caveat to all of this. The body is not just an inscribed tablet documenting a biography of a whole bunch of social identities and statuses. It is directly involved in social action. So the body, in a sense, is capital itself. It's an asset that helps determine men's aging and other capital, and their overall status depends on the field of activity. Now, according to Tully, all bodies have capital, but her argument that bodies of dominant, she makes the argument that bodies of dominant groups have more capital. The author disagrees a little. He says that the types of bodies that are valued will depend on where people are socially located and what values different groups ascribe to physical bodies. Now, in the US Midwest, working class aging men, who ride a motorcycle, have large forearms and biceps and a hunking beer belly, are how they're socially identified, the displays of his masculine capital within his biker group. In comparison, an older man who's a master runner who runs 35 to 100 miles a week, his lean toned body would be of value in his field, his range of sport, in his running. It will have practically no value in a biker gang or biker group. So the contextual capital, because the body is capital, but it is within a context. A large man even with a beer belly, but with large biceps on his Harley is more valuable in a biker group, and a lean athlete is that kind of body is valued differently in a different context. So the way aging men are oriented and they treat their body, it shows their cultivated masculinity, class, and taste. In a sense, disposition, the way men treat their bodies is the deepest disposition of the habitus. Habitus is a set of preferences, likes, tastes, right? So how men treat their bodies is a representation of their deepest dispositions. So these dispositions refer to people's second nature habits, which have been, which are a result of their class, which are a result of their generation, their ethnicity, in how they dress, how they consume food and beverages, how they speak, their body techniques, and their orientations towards aging. In wealthier communities in Europe and North America, the older body is considered healthy enough, aged but not old, and it's there's an aesthetic appeal to it, and it's able to trek mile after mile on walks or hikes, and it's often displayed in media representations. In the working class, the valued body needs to be functional. So depending on who you are, if you are in an affluent class, body is considered valuable if it looks aesthetically appealing, not necessarily without clothes, but in a well-dressed manner. And from a working class perspective, the functionality is what is valued, aged but capable. The physical capital quests for aging men have distinct trajectories. Perhaps maybe a late life membership in a health and fitness club, or occasional weightlifting in a garage mixed with evening stops at beer pubs. And that's the variation that you see. Now, dispositions also frame existential worries that originate from old men's bodily experiences. For example, a healthy old man in his 70s who regularly takes walks and has no sign of arthritis may interpret knee pain as near disabling. By direct contrast, a similar aged man with a history of daily use of anti-inflammatory medication to manage arthritis, while he continues to be a self-employed builder of patios or as carpenter, will probably look at the knee pain as ho-hum. This is typical of older men who are athletes as well. Bodily pain is treated as quite mundane. Now, in the example, we suggested the first man who worries about his bodily aging's effect on lifestyle, the second normalizes it as part of work and class related. Each older man has his body as his physical capital to take to walks and maintain an honored status, or to retain economic and masculine capital, in the second case as a landscaper or carpenter. So it's very contextual how concerns come into being, into the mind, and how they're framed as being important or not. So then the author asks, which kind of bodily reminders of aging are more unnerving? And he cites Barrett and Gumber, who find that everyday body problems, pain, imbalance, some vertigo, they exert stronger effects on age consciousness. And that makes sense because it's a constant reminder. It's also a reminder that it is particularly unique to aging. So they exert a conscious effect on reminding older men of their age. And bodily aids, wearing a hearing aid, anything that's omnipresent. Uh, anything that's brief, like an illness that goes away in 7 days, a fractured hand or leg, those don't tend to be reminders of physical aging. Most age reminders that give rise to aging consciousness are definitely more social than actually involved with the individual itself most of the time, and they become more obvious in people's 50s. And they may not be limited to the body reminders of aches and pains or changes in appearance and mobility issues. Age reminders can originate from outside of the person too. My grandmother, who's in her 90s, is often comments that she's ready to leave this world, and she feels very, very old, and she feels guilty. There's almost a survivor's guilt for living so long, because none of her peers, family of a comparable age, are still around. They've all passed on. So oftentimes the external reminders may not be your own pain and suffering. It could be people of comparable age passing on, or hospitalization, or their morbidity, or maybe a grandchild completes high school, then you realize, oh boy, I'm getting old. So contextual messages such as that, or being the oldest man on a job or in a group, these reminders are obviously different for different people. They are also different for aging gay men, who have less intergenerational reminders, such as children and grandchildren, to cue their aging, and they face looking old earlier than heterosexual men. And we spoke about lookism in our last lecture as well in gay communities. Once the body is recognized as a project, constructed and reconstructed, obviously over and over within the different times, we can appreciate how more recently aging men and women are more conscious of their body as a personal project than as a natural entity. So that's what's changed in postmodern eras in comparison to, say, their great grandparents' generation. It's at odds with the historical importance of bodies in agrarian societies, where the body was more utilitarian. That's, you use the body to get stuff done. In modern affluent countries like ours, many men have the resources to maintain, to intervene, and to alter their body's aging trajectory. So the range of bodywork practices undertaken may be simple morning stretching exercises, maybe replacing eyeglasses with contacts, taking care of the cataract with laser surgery, or regular use of anti-inflammatory drugs to keep themselves functioning. So a number of social theorists like Bauman, Featherstone, and Hepworth, they propose that bodies in postmodern communities, like our communities now, are a means of displaying self, sometimes in guises. It's proposed that it's a reflexive body than a corporeal body. So the reflexive body, it's recognized that our body is tweaked, or the body it's a sign of personal self-expression and at times reinvention. So body practices reflect one of the ways where individuals work on themselves by self-regulating their fleshy bodies and their conduct. This work on your body is what the author means by body work. Middle-aged and old men's lived bodies, in terms of what they do as their everyday reflective practices, is under-researched. There's not enough studies to really talk about how old men or middle-aged men work on their bodies. Based on interviews with late middle-aged men and working class obese British men, one study found that the men joined weight loss programs to improve their body aesthetic, They were motivated by contemporary appearance-related expectations and pressures. So before participating in the weight loss program, they had discursively minimized their large bodies, and despite slimming several belt holes in size, the men intended to remain big in order to retain masculine capitals. As far as they were concerned, their big bodies symbolized, according to them, masculinity, and by reducing some but not too much weight, they sought to reclaim earlier manly feelings of being fit. These men's body techniques they sought to modify, maintain, and thematize the body. Now, along with the embodiment of class or ethnic taste, men also embody their experience within age relations and with growing older. Sometimes these growing older experiences come to involve intentional body projects. Participating in exercise, whether it's swimming, martial arts, tai chi, mall walking, or relearning to play musical instruments in later life are good examples of aging men purposefully working at the body to modify it. Breathing rhythm and endurance are worked on and altered, especially if you're learning how to swim or tai chi, or when you're learning how to do the guitar, it's finger dexterity. All this is considered body work. Nicholas has a question. Nicholas, go ahead, please. Nicholas?
Oh, can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, sorry. Yes,
sorry.
Go ahead.
My microphone was just off. So like you mentioned bodies as being like a project. So like doing things like physical activity and like cardio and stuff can help maintain the body in healthier ways, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So I think labor jobs and like maybe like labor jobs you kind of find I've kind of found anyway. I've worked a labor job before. Like generally it's kind of like low intensity. You're not like burning enough calories or anything to like consider it a workout when you're doing a labor job most times, not all the time. But so then you outside of the workplace, I think workers will find that they don't have energy to do like proper workouts because they were like in the sun all day or whatever, right?
Yes, 100%. And this goes back to our initial comment that when your material, the closer, the more distance you have from your material needs, the more you're able to focus on body projects and invest in your body, correct? So typically your labor-based work requires you to work physically for a living. So you're not that distanced from, your body literally has to be used for any material gains.
Yeah, like you use your body functionally, but
Correct.
not necessarily to in a healthier way. Like you might not be it's like sometimes labor jobs aren't considered like a workout, like you aren't working hard enough to like maintain a fit body at your workplace. But then like you go home from the workplace and then you don't really have energy to do like that cardio workout that your body would need to stay healthy.
Correct. They're physically demanding. They often require repetitive motion or repetitive posturing, and thereby they end up being quite exhausting. There's also a lot of wear and tear, which is why the body has projects. The projects are quite different, whether you're working class or whether you're affluent. The way wealthier classes, men from wealthier classes, work and focus on their bodies quite different from men who use their body for work primarily.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that is true, and that's they talk about that in the beginning of this chapter, and we kind of addressed it. And for example, like even these examples of participating in sports, doing tai chi and stuff, if you are working with the hands, if you're a carpenter, you're probably not going to want to come home and do an hour of tai chi. So it's not probably going to happen. So it works out differently. Your body projects are quite different. Okay. So sorry, we were talking about the embodiment of class or ethnic taste, and then we had Nicholas's comment about men working in labor not being physically able to undertake different projects on their body other than what they do for work. And they're not necessarily workouts because while they are taxing, they don't necessarily burn calories or maintain overall body musculature, strength, or endurance. Anne, how do I say your name, Anne? Is it Anne or Anna? How's your name pronounced?
It's actually Anais. It's
Anais.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's exactly as it says. Okay, go ahead, Anais.
Yes. So it's just to go off a little bit on what I think Brian was saying.
Or Nicholas, maybe?
Yes, Nicholas. So it's just to understand a little bit how he was saying, no, how you were saying like poorer men, they kind of have like less time, less resources, etc. Right? But
Correct.
I feel like a lot of times, I don't know, maybe it's like from what I've seen like people who are poor, like back home, by example, I'm from Rwanda. I feel like people who are poorer live longer. If that makes sense.
Okay, that's an interesting observation, and I don't know if it's specific to where your background is from. Typically, people in physically demanding jobs, they tend, a lot of them will have a good body tone because of the physicality of their work, but because of the continuous nature, they don't have long life expectancy. There's a lot of wear and tear, and also the inability to take care of themselves in the event of something serious or hospitalization typically leads to a lower life expectancy with lower income levels.
Right.
So that's what we find in a lot of the world. That may not be in your particular background, but definitely people who are involved in physical labor, and we see this in India as well, that people who are involved in building and construction, road projects, it doesn't even matter what they eat and what they drink, they still seem to have toned, strong bodies.
Yes, I was gonna say the food too, because like they eat like more natural foods, and like the medicine, I guess it's like more natural.
And a lot of it you have to remember is, we're all when we make all these observations, our observations are snapshots. We're not really contextualizing our observations some of these times, because we really haven't interviewed those people to find out what they eat, what they consume. So what I can say from my experience is that people involved in physically demanding jobs from India, where I am originally from, their food quality is not particularly high. It's low grade food, and they eat what's available. They'll eat lots of cheap food, but they still seem to be in very good shape. Melissa has a comment, so I'm going to let Melissa chime in.
Hi. I was just wanting to say something about dispositions when we were talking about age reminders. Something you had said about when you were talking about kind of survivor's guilt. I'm in nursing, and I actually work in a nursing home part-time now while I'm in school. And I just wanted to add on to what you said, is that that's such a true and real thing, especially to the people that are now in nursing homes and are often alone, and their significant other has passed before they have, and they're kind of left with that guilt of being the one that is still alive and their other one has passed, and they feel old, and they're just reminded that they're aged because of their other's mortality and stuff like that. So I just wanted to add on to that. That was a good point that you made.
Well, thank you, Melissa. That's a very useful comment in the context of what we're talking about, of recognizing your aging through external sources, not from your own body. So thank you. Okay, so sorry, I'm just going to try to get my train of thought back on this. And don't worry if I lose my train of thought. It's okay. We're having a good discussion. It is productive to the class. I typically do encounter these challenges as I teach. So anyway, so we're talking about older men working through different things, different body projects, maybe learning music, maybe undertaking some exercise. So an example that the author talks about is he talks about a 74-year-old retired high school teacher, Ralph. So the author and him work side by side, and they're talking in potentially gymnasium setting. He doesn't specify, but he talks about rowing machines. And for the older gentleman, Ralph, his regular cardio workout is all about for him to have a later life morning routine than making and maintaining physical connections. So Ralph is a widowed grandfather, and his goal is to stay fit. It appears as though Ralph is a former Marine, and he has different things tattooed on his arms, his grandkids' names on one arm. On the other arm, he has an eagle atop a globe, and the word Semper Fi, which is, I guess it's the logo or the war cry of the U.S. Marine Corps. So his tattooing is pro-social body art, and it's masculine. It's considered masculine emotional work. So the body art captures turning life point experiences for him, being a Marine, being a grandfather, and his regular exercise is aiming for continuity. So it's a reflexive experience of his body itself, and each of these different things is intrinsic to his reflexive project as an aging man. Nike says, "Just do it," right? The postmodernist maxim, "just do it." It suggests that aging men can and should control their bodies through consumer and lifestyle choices and liberate themselves from quote unquote normal aging, while of course simultaneously defending themselves against ageism's demasculating account of getting older. I find this very interesting. I find that in order to defend yourself from ageism, you buy into the ageist narrative that there are certain ways to age. So anyway, but that's the discourse we have going on in our society. To basically deflect or thwart the marketed terror of sinking into the black hole of infirmity, consumer advertising, what it does is it targets old men's body functioning. It doesn't worry about the aesthetics. It does, but not as much. So you don't see as many ads for men to go ahead and do different things cosmetically to improve themselves, but it more targets functioning. Old men are urged to resist the stigma and shame of becoming old by actively engaging in all kinds of anti-aging body work found in exercise and fitness programs, or in stress reduction, mindful meditation, hormone enhancement, use of vitamins, etc. And of course, resexualizing pharmaceuticals. It's very rare to see old men represented in advertisements for dental care or for clothing choices or dietary control. And also the other thing is, in any of this advertising, rarely you notice the race and class privileges that underlie the recommendations. They're typically marketed for white men with money. Okay, it's also equally glossed over how sexopharmaceuticals are marketed as a way of ensuring, control or maintenance of healthy heterosexual relationships, and not as an adjunct to stimulants that aging men. It's not a support for them to maintain their erections during periods of prolonged sexual activity. So marketed bodywork has a moral expectation, and Featherstone, Hepworth, and later Calasanti, they remind us that postmodern ethos, it advocates for self-responsibility, for agency, including taking responsibility for one's own body shape, health, virility, and look. So it's all on the individual, as per the modern agency-based narrative. Whether the marketing is a recommendation for a regime of very modest physical activity to promote healthy aging, or whether it's purposefully resexing aging bodies with pharmaceuticals, the author believes that the body work that old men do aims to assure that late lifestyle options are more in line with what they believe will maintain their masculine capital. So men are always involved in body work, whether it's something visible that's seen by strangers or not, or even by people they know. Studies of old men's body work are unfortunately very few, because researchers have maintained the precept that body work is mostly appearance oriented and it's not something men do. But that's not true. Obviously there are some situations where men are involved in appearance-based body work. For example, aging men toning their muscular appearance by weightlifting or maintaining muscle size by working out. Or the aesthetic body of a gay widower to, he's going back into the relationship market where lookism is important, so he's working on his looks. Maybe he colors his hair, gets a different kind of facial hair appearance. But the no-look convention creates an environment of a lot of cultural silence about the ordinary body work among aging men. So this is all the visible stuff: the muscles, the way the face looks, the recoloring of the hair. But there's body work always happening. There's normal body work. There's very less commentary on that. Body work is as simple as clothing, diet, and exercise. A major exception to the absence of body work is Kate Slevin's 2008 work. She wrote an influential essay on how healthy enough old men, if you're able to, they might discipline their bodies through exercise or through diet, or sometimes through how they clothe themselves. And each practice is designed to avoid the stigma of looking old. So William, who's 75 years old, he's quite adamant. This is they're citing older men from Kate Slevin's work. And an older gentleman called William, he says, "I don't go around wearing old folks' clothes." At age 80, Wayne also appears to have such concerns on his mind. "I don't dress like an old man." So the choice of clothing is also considered part of body work. Anything that influences appearance. It may not be physically the body per se. It may be anything that has to do with appearance. Clothing choice is part of older adults' everyday body practices, and it's the evidence of embodied masculinity. It can reproduce ageist standards when men judge whose clothed bodies are old. Certain styles, choice of certain styles can reproduce that. Embodied clothing choices just happen as far as older men are concerned. As a 65-year-old retired Canadian stonemason, what he says is that he takes pride in his appearance, so he wants to look smart in the way he dresses, and he wants to be clean and tidy. But other than that, he doesn't think much about appearance itself. So part of body work is your clothing, is your diet, is your exercise. The existing conceptual work or theories in old men's ordinary body work, which is the day-to-day stuff, it reflects a narrowness. There's a very narrow interpretation of body work. And the author is talking about the work of another researcher, Mike Featherstone, when he talks about how Mike Featherstone splits body work into two purposeful types: techniques and strategies aimed at the inner body, where the concern is with health and optimum functioning, or the outer body, where the body's appearance and men's control of their movement are the foci. So it's kind of a very narrow split as far as the author is concerned. Sorry, Mosa?
Oh, I just wanted to add, when you were talking, I guess I can wait till you're done if you wanted, but I just wanted to say that when you were talking about, I don't go around wearing old folks' clothes, I just wanted to say that, like, society has put labels and rules on clothes and items or certain outfits and looks as young and old. And discriminated against those who, I guess, go against those rules and social norms, whether it's old people trying to dress young or young people dressing older. I guess they both get, society doesn't like that.
I know it's interesting how body work happens, right? I mean, 100%, Melissa. I really like that comment. And while from the older man's perspective, he's continuing, he doesn't label it as body work, so he continues to dress a certain way, and there is his perception of what he thinks old people dress like. So he goes ahead and puts a bunch of clothes on. But if he was dressing the way that people do in the 60s, even if he dresses like a young man in the 60s, it still will get labeled, even without using words, visibly as old, right? And the second thing is, if he goes ahead and wears clothes that people in their 20s are wearing, that's something society, it may not be spoken or said to the person's face, but that's also viewed
Exactly.
in a dim light. So it's a good point. So body work remains complex.
Yeah.
And it's kind of tricky as men adapt as to what they will do in terms of expressing or using the body for reflexive expression. So anyway, so the criticism from the author was about the work of Featherstone, and he says it's a very narrow discursive that he talks about the internal and inside and the outside body work. This inner-outer distinction is it's good for understanding concepts such as the role of musculoskeletal complaints amongst Dutch construction workers and their inability to do hard physical labor after 65, but it tends to be quite narrow. So in the body of literature, the sense that there are a lot of ways ordinary body work is undertaken by men, that is missing. Just the sheer breadth. There are specific examples, but this is just nothing that encompasses the sheer range. Whether the work is directed towards the inner or outer body, as Featherstone has suggested. So for example, are the ways old men discipline their body in everyday relationships, for example, to not lean on a shopping cart as if it's a walker, to walk down the stairs whenever possible rather than use an elevator for one floor, or so are they trying to distance themselves as being seen as old? Are these practices ordinary, or are they purposeful? Is there a role to that purpose or to that task, or is it just appearance? Has the experience of being defined as old for many years than would be the case if they were heterosexual, because if you're an aging gay man in a gay community, you probably get described or defined as old far sooner. So there are a lot of different questions. Does the bombardment of advertising linking aging bodies to demasculation, even emasculation, how does it affect old men in rural geographies where there's a lot of physical labor than, say, their age peers in urban environments? Old farmers, for example, may rarely modify their gender-affirming body practices as they grow old. They might continue to do exactly what they were doing when they were younger. They continue to wake up early. They do what they do as farmers, husbands, grandfathers, and neighbors, with or without knee replacement. Elite heterosexual aging baby boomers may groom themselves with hair coloring. They may use anti-wrinkle skincare creams and A to Z potency multivitamins and medications to uphold, the bodily time norms within their social worlds. But really, I mean, in this range, all of these different practices, they have not. The whole range hasn't really been explored or commented or studied. To date, researchers have studied perhaps the body work of aging runners, swimmers, tennis players, motorcyclists, homeless old men, and they illustrate different techniques of body works. But there's no real in-depth work of the ordinary body work that is spread amongst the large population of old men. basically, in some usual conceptions of the body have focused upon its visible features. You know, when you look at the body, you look at skin elasticity, age spots, body art, and when the body work men may do to mask age and to retain masculine capital, that's what you're looking at. According to Crossley, this is really an outside-in perspective. So you know, men are masking or creating all these impressions when they do their body work to allow for an outsider's perception to perceive them as still having a significant amount of masculine capital. This is useful from an observer's perspective, but most for what is missing is an understanding of, you know, aging men's body action coordination that just happen as part of what they do day to day. And now we get to the fun part, the medicalized aging body. So what do we think medicalizing the aging body is? What does that mean in our common understanding? Go ahead, Akifa.
It means like how nowadays people try to offer plastic surgery or other like wrinkle-free cream, stuff like that, like things that you could use medically in order for yourself to look younger or feel younger.
Right. So there's a therapeutic cure for everything, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Akifa. Joan?
Yeah, I think more like people who do exercise, they take certain kind of vitamins. They believe in certain kind of things that would give them robust muscles and keep them staying younger and fresher. Some tend to sway from pharmaceutical medication, but they go like herbal or stuff like that.
Right. True. So, Kendra?
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So when I think of medicalizing, I think of actual like medical conditions and problems. So having like someone being like diagnosed and then following like certain like interventions or like the treatment to kind of address those.
Okay, thank you, Kendra. Anais?
I was actually going to say a little bit like Kendra, like medicalizing would be like, let's say if someone has like a sleep disorder or something, they'll like prescribe some medicine for that. Not really sure.
Thank you, Anais. Michelle?
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Oh yeah, I'm thinking about the like non-therapeutic way of treating your body.
Right. So how would that be? Why would you consider that medicalization?
When I see medicalization, I'm thinking about medicine, like pharmacology.
Right. Okay, thank you, Michelle. Erica?
When I think of medicalizing with the aging body, it makes me think of polypharmacy.
Okay, so you're thinking of multiple morbidities and so on. Chloe
Yeah.
says, sorry, I'm just going to read this from the text because Chloe has comment in the text box. Thank you, Erica. It's interesting because I'm going to chime in as well. I just wanted to have a little bit of a shout out from the class. Chloe says we're more able to rely upon medical services to prolong our life and rectify issues that arise naturally as we age. Okay. Yeah, so the issue, the reason this is brought up, medicalizing the aging body, is the body goes through bodily changes as we get older, as we go through different phases in life. Um, what I believe is an issue is the offer of cure, so to speak, quote unquote cure is what I would say. Um, it's a solution to fix everything. So as an older adult, your testosterone levels drop, the libido decreases, your sex drive is down, but that's seen as a medical problem, and all of a sudden then you have Cialis and Viagra saying, well, go ahead, pop these pills, they will address your sexual challenge. Or you have other products saying, well, you have 2-3 drops of ginkgo biloba and all of a sudden your memory is restored and you don't have to worry about being forgetful anymore. So the thing is, the normal, quote unquote, the process of aging itself is being seen as an opportunity by the pharmacological industry to target different parts and act as though that is not normal to lose all of these functionalities or have a decline of any sort, and that must be treated right away to something that must be fixed. Okay, so that's the medicalizing part of the aging body. I don't know if I spoke to the class yesterday about this. There's a large group of researchers in Europe, the US, and Canada now who are leaning towards trying to get the World Health Organization to declare aging as a disease that must be treated. I think that's, I don't know, I find that bizarre. But in any case, that's the way some researchers are seeing the whole thing. Joan, well, we have 2 participants.
Yeah,
okay.
but for them to declare that aging is a disease, basically the way how the world is going, they don't really want older people in society these days. So why are they declaring it that they fix it to make more money?
So here's how the world works, right? For anything, the WHO holds, the World Health Organization has a lot of power and clout in determining what can be considered a disease, a pervasive disease, long-term disease. So once the WHO declares it as a disease, then research groups studying aging can actually start to tap into large grants and funds which are allocated for studying chronic conditions. Aging is chronic, right? It's not going away. It's not temporary. It's not an acute condition. It's chronic. Mm-hmm. And there's a 100% guarantee that all of us will get, quote unquote, infected by aging. So we're all going to age. So if you the moment you start calling it a disease, all of these different research groups can tap into funding sources in different countries and essentially prop their own careers up.
Okay.
So that's the politics of it. Kendra says, aging should not be declared a disease. Aging and growing older is a privilege that many individuals don't get to experience. Great point, Kendra. And that's a very interesting perspective. I mean, that's true. Not everyone gets to be old. So that's a privilege. The moment you start making it a disease, then there's a stigma against growing old too.
But the thing is with aging, as you said, not everybody gets to experience aging. And when I was growing up, you look forward to get a profession, grow old, and then enjoy retirement and stuff. But now society, it's like there is nothing like that. Like they're taking everything out. So you're supposed to be young all the days of your life.
And at least that's what the media message is, right? Maintain your youth, do this, do that. Mm-hmm. This will help you feel like you're in your whatever 30s, 40s. Nicholas has a comment. He says pharmacology is sometimes seen as a short-term fix for natural aging, and it makes people come back for more and become reliant on certain medication. I also think it could be the same for some therapies. Well, that's true, and that's part of medicalizing aging, right? I mean, it's essentially it's selling never-aging masculinities. It's promoting never-aging masculinities. It's setting the tone for norms that youth must be rewarded, and any change in the functionality experienced in youth is to be stigmatized. And that's what's being pushed by the pharmaceutical industry. Michelle says the body becomes a subject of medical disorders. It gets old. For example, most studies claim that Alzheimer's claim. Well, aging is an independent factor. Isn't it that, Teresa says, isn't it that right now it is difficult to access research funds to study chronic diseases that are age-related, and by declaring aging a disease, it may make more funds available? Teresa, yes, that is the hope. That's what these different groups are hoping to accomplish. They are hoping to accomplish the objective of declaring aging as a disease so that they can access funds. But think about the social implications. Now, when you pass a certain age, you have a chronic illness because it's been declared a disease. That means you are now diseased in society the moment you're over 65 or whenever traditional definition of age happens.
And in the US, you wouldn't be able to get insurance because then if it's a disease, then it's going to be a pre-existing condition that never goes away.
Well, you can. So because it didn't pre-exist when you're in your 30s and 40s. So in that sense, probably not. But it's a challenge when you start to go for declaring old age as a disease. Then there are other social problems that come with part of that package. So there's something in the chat window, and I have 3 people with raised hands. So I don't want to go too far because we still have a bunch of content to cover, but we'll address all of these existing comments and then we'll move forward. Okay, so we'll address the chat and we'll take comments from the 3 students who have their hands up. So chat window first. Akila says, it also makes us rely on medicine. We wouldn't be as concerned from a disease as someone who have been many years ago when there weren't certain medications, because we know there's a cure. And that's, when cures are advertised, obviously, there is a temptation to see if that solution is applicable for individuals. So yes, I agree with you on that, Akila. We'll go Brian first and Akifa next. Go ahead, Brian.
So I just have a hard time understanding this. Like, how can one treat aging as a disease? Because aging is a natural part of our body, right? And if, let's just say, you were to treat it like a disease, it means that you would no longer be allowed to age, kind of getting rid of the old population in a sense. Wouldn't that be very unethical and go against a lot of ethical rules set out by the scientific community?
Well, so this is a great philosophical question, okay? And the philosophical question here is, first of all, when you classify something as a disease, does it have to be treatable for you to get funds? Usually the argument is the promise to find treatment. Richard Nixon declared war on cancer in the 1960s. We are in 2020 and there is no victory over cancer. There are some kinds of cancers that are treatable. A lot of cancers will still take lives. So it's not treatable, but cancer continues to draw a ton of research funding. Okay, so there are researchers who have made their careers and careers of a whole bunch of their subordinates because of investing in cancer research. So it's a promise of treatment. Now, is the promise of treatment of old age unethical? Well, so the argument, so I don't follow these groups in great detail, but at least I know some of the arguments presented that the challenges of old age come with a lot of chronic problems and suffering, and the role of science and research is to mitigate or to alleviate human suffering. So that's why classifying old age as a chronic disease actually will help us mitigate and solve all of these problems associated with aging itself. For example, aging is an independent predisposing factor for several conditions: arthritis, cancer, Alzheimer's, so on. So by fixing aging, you'll fix all of this, and that seems to be the moral compass that a lot of these research groups use.
But the thing I'm like kind of grasping onto is if you are treating that, wouldn't that practically make everybody immortal on this planet? Like, hey, no more aging.
And okay, my question is, so I'm not saying that it should happen, but what is the problem if everyone's immortal?
Well, then how would there be a process of birth and rebirth? The whole point of life is so that we were born and then we die. And if we are to be immortal, wouldn't that create other problems for the planet, like, you know, overpopulation, more health issues,
Probably, but
societal issues as such?
who is to say that people should die and be reborn, right?
That's also true, yeah.
Right? Who is to say that? We don't, I mean, I don't have the right to say that. I don't think so. I mean, I can speak for what I want for me, but really, do I have the right to say what should happen? No, I don't. I mean, I have an opinion. Thank you though for the comment, Brian. It's, you know, it's different things, and you know, through the course things percolate and we think about stuff, and we, you know, it's just to get this thinking going. Akifa.
I also had to say something about like ethical principles. I took ethical studies, like the course last semester, and there was also an ethical principle saying that like after a certain age, it's as if you're getting more than you deserve. So that's like sort of a way in deciding, for example, if there's two patients in need of a kidney transplant, and one is like of an older age and one is of a younger age, who to give it to. And based on that ethical principle, because apparently if you're old, it would be more than what you deserved. I don't know why. Like that's sort of a weird way to.
Medical ethics works a little bit differently from social ethics. The general principle in medical ethics is you give, if there is a contest, if there's a competition for resources. So for example, in the Italian example, when COVID hit Italy, it was really, really bad. And what they found was if you put a younger person on a ventilator, they were very sick, they would come out of it in whatever time, you know, a week and a half, whatever it took, maybe a few days. If you put an older person on it, anyone over 65, if they got sick enough to be put on a ventilator, not only would they stay on the ventilator for 2 weeks, but only 30% made it out alive. So because there were a limited number of ventilators, by default, if you were sick enough with COVID and you came to the hospital in Italy during the initial phases around Milan and stuff, and it was really bad, the doctors were exhausted. They were overwhelmed. There were a limited number of ventilators. If you were 65, you're in bad shape, you needed a ventilator, and there was you and there was a younger person, the younger person would get the ventilator. The doctors were having to play God. But the medical principle there was you always offer it to the person who has the better chance of making it out alive. If that's not a situation, then you offer it to the person who would benefit, not just benefit the most, who would cost the least to a broader range of society. So for example, if there were a limited number of ventilators, and if an older person had to be on a ventilator for 3 weeks and the younger person would make it out in 3 days, and that was a limiting factor, medical principles would require that it go to the younger person so that the ventilator is again available for use after.
So although they think it's ethical, in a way it is unethical as well.
Correct, because you're prioritizing a younger life to an older life.
Yeah.
Correct. So I get that, and these are very complex arguments. There is no right answer to any of these. Why should it? And then the question is, well, if you can't make a decision, then both die.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So these are very, very difficult decisions, and you know, people do the best they can in these situations. Nobody likes to be caught in that situation. So yeah, with that, I'm just going to stop for now. I think we have 3 comments. I don't want to get too far away from the central topic. What did I miss? The aging process is simply the body growing weak and dying. This is Jenna. Well, you can read her comment too. And Chloe. So Jenna says the aging process is simply the body growing weak and dying. Viewing it from a medical perspective, regardless of how aging should be viewed as a privilege, the human body does start to break down. Your immune system is growing weak. Bones become extremely frail. Organs begin to slow down from a medical standpoint. Aging can be seen as a disease. And that is a perspective. So absolutely. There is a lot of pressure. This is from Chloe. There's a lot of pressure in healthcare to fix people as medicalization is such a prominent factor. Yes, everybody needs to be fixed, right? I have thought about how this impacts on people's lifestyles. Do people not work as hard to stay healthy / fit and live longer based on a reliance? So this is, anyway, I'm going to end with the comment. We'll not take any more comments now because I want to get to a certain point before we break for lunch. And I have a nagging suspicion we'll be a little bit behind if I don't do it. So challenges remain. The urge to fix everything has grown stronger. Whether it's ethical or not to fix several things, we have to recognize that this narrative that's being pushed that we need to fix everything is coming from groups that are for profit. This is not coming from physicians. This is not likely being championed by the people who are experiencing it. This narrative is coming from bodies that tend to have a lot to gain. That's why you fix this, you fix that, and you fix the other thing. Hey, your hair is going gray. Let's go get you a dye and go fix it. That's not necessarily medicalizing, but that's body work. But then the next thing, hey, you have lower libido. How about you go ahead and take this testosterone supplement, which will help you boost your sex drive? Or you have erectile dysfunction, you go ahead and take Cialis or Viagra, whatever it is. Ask your doctor about this drug. I don't know how many of you watch American television. I used to a while ago, and it's always about asking your doctor about new stuff that will help you move ahead. So in the term medicalization is essentially an insidious, according to Irving Zola, is an insidious and undramatic phenomenon accomplished by medicalizing much of daily living. It occurs when, quote unquote, conditions that were previously not even considered conditions by the medical gaze, what happens is medicine suddenly grabs them because it sees that it can make money out of them. So when you think about the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, when, early 90s, before Viagra had become a big deal, people weren't concerned that, men weren't concerned that they weren't performing the same as when they were young. This was quite normal. And then in comes a drug that can do something different for them, and all of a sudden, reproducing what men could do in their 20s has become important. Anyway, so it's been appropriated by big medicine. It's construed as a medical problem, and it's judged in need of treatment by some form of medically guided intervention. It's not just medicine, it's also alternative therapies such as going to the chiropractor, yoga. In Western societies, men are surrounded by, they're bombarded by biomedicalization of their aging bodies, right from hip replacement to laser eye surgery to invisible hearing aids that help them mask getting older. There are several notable trends in medicalizing masculinities, and it feeds into the ageism that's associated with having a quote-unquote normal aging bodily change. So age-related bodily changes are recast into masculinity problems. An example is the term quote-unquote andropause. So it's an erroneous thinking that it's the male equivalent of menopause. It's an age-related condition, so obviously, as with lowering amount of testosterone, you're demasculated through impotency, or perhaps regrowing your hair. So the creation of testosterone replacement therapy as an elixir for your masculinity problems, just because there's a drop in testosterone, or that come after middle age, it's become highly medicalized. Whether men find these slowly arising body changes troubling or not, there's evidence to show men are dealing more with functionality than with what they're being bombarded with. But it still doesn't stop pharmaceutical companies from bombarding through their advertisements to talk to their doctors, to consider their options. These options are presented as being very interesting is that they present themselves as treatments which are social in nature, and basically they are touted as being a counter for ageism, but they still build, or they still advocate essentially for never aging masculinities. And as we were discussing before, big medicine is the big pharmaceutical companies, Pfizer, Novozymes, GlaxoSmithKline, all these big guys. So this the pharmaceutical company has expansively intervened for several things. And it's not just the pharmaceuticals themselves. It's the medical profession, starting from the prostate removal surgery. Now, most men in their 50s and 60s will start to develop an enlargement of the prostate. This is quite normal for the aging process. But what it has become, especially in the US, is there's a big push to have an enlarged prostate removed. A small percentage of enlarged prostates will actually develop cancer. Okay, and there is some discomfort associated with an enlarged prostate. The men might have to frequently urinate, or they might have difficulty getting urine out. But there's a whole bunch of treatments advocated to control your prostate size. So there's transurethral microwave therapy, there's pharmaceuticals, there are many drugs to relieve symptoms. And they have, some of them have awful side effects. And this is basically big medicine and the medical system in the US taking control of the conversation. Now, in Canada, we are somewhat fortunate in the sense that big medicine obviously continues to advertise, but there are only so many drugs that are covered by, say, OHIP, or that's available in stores in Canada. So a lot of the medical systems propagation of drugs to use to manage your aging masculinity, we don't necessarily encounter all of them here. So we are fortunate in that. Medical sociologists and men's researchers, studies researchers, they've called attention to the expansion of medicine's social control in the conversation. They keep talking about, I keep talking about erectile dysfunction because that seems to be a huge target. So literally the medicalization, the term means to make medical. So, or to make things quote unquote treatable. While it says it's going to treat a bunch of things, what it's doing without saying, when you start to medicalize everything from aging to the conditions associated with aging, is it's casting all of those natural changes that occur within the body as we age as undesirable and worthy of stigma. Okay, that's the problem with the discourse that's out there. Our life expectancies have changed. We are all living longer, both men and women. So the way the pharmaceutical industry has started to understand this and see the money in this is they've started to target life restriction drugs or address life restricting conditions more than life threatening. So a lot of the advertisements that are on TV today address chronic pain, address fatigue, address not necessarily even chronic pain, just pain, address the risk of heart attacks, so consuming low dose aspirin or baby aspirin or whatever it is. So it's a whole range of conditions that are seen as life restricting. So big pharmacy wants to address those as being problems. So the change, the flexibility of the aging body it's it's not recognized, and the neoliberal messaging is that all these abundant anti-aging mechanisms, medicines, and technologies should be consumed, and the age-relating decline must be avoided, so that older men can revitalize their manhood. So this three-pronged assault, from public health self-care campaigns, which tell men to take care of themselves. So it's a very prescriptive thing that people should be responsible for their own health. Then there's the obviously consumer culture's anti-aging co-modification, and of course the rise of anti-aging medicine. So these three things, they start to obviously work into the habitus of newer generations of older men. And they start to think about their body as being plastic, which means conditions being reversible and all of that. In 2005, Peter Conrad noted that medicalization, in fact, has shifted exclusively to start to advertise quote unquote younger lifestyles to older men. And the focus has shifted to body enhancing products and services. A whole bunch of lifestyle drugs out there, and the goal is really not to prevent death or harm or damage. It's more to improve lifestyle. So things like promoting hair growth, all of those products. So successful aging probably has a medical background to it, as far as I remember. For the past 30 or more years, it's become more and more ordinary for aging men to seek out medical assistance to alternate and reformulate their body, through different technologies like joint replacement, LASIK surgery, dental implants, heart valve replacement, etc. Now, don't get me wrong. I see what the author is saying. I don't think anyone should suffer and die in pain because they had a defective heart valve. I think it's appropriate. It's the promotion, it's the selling, the constant pitching. Hey, do you want to run an Ironman when you're 60? Go get yourself new knees. That's that kind of discourse. For example, this is a personal example. I have a friend who is now in his 60s, and throughout his younger years, he was supremely fit, an excellent athlete. He has completed several Ironman competitions. An Ironman competition is full marathon, so it's about 46 kilometers run. It's 100 kilometer, maybe it's 100 mile. It's a 100-mile bicycle ride, so it's 160 kilometers bicycle ride. And it's a 5-mile swim or an 8-kilometer swim. These are all done back to back, and people usually take about an entire day to finish it, just because of the time it takes to do each of these events. So it's very, very taxing. And if you are an Ironman athlete, you are very fit, but you're also subjecting your body to a lot. Now, this friend of mine who recently turned 62 or 63 is unable to, his life has changed quite a bit because his knees have worn out, and it was recommended that as a result of the bones in his knee knocking in touch with each other because the cartilage is worn out, he will need a knee replacement. So he wants to have a knee replacement, but the reason he wants to have a knee replacement is he wants to continue. It's been pitched to him that if he had his knee replacement, he could continue to participate in Ironmans. And I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing, but I also have a problem with the way it was pitched, that you have a problem because of A, B, and C. Let's go ahead and medically fix it so you can go back and do the exact same thing. And that's the issue. So he wants to reconnect with activities he did as he was younger. So I don't have an issue with him acquiring the knee itself. What I have is with what is being sold to him as the deterioration of his activity and age-associated physical change must be fixed a certain way so that he can continue to do things exactly the same way as he was doing before. So there's a lack of acceptance of age-related and activity-related change throughout a life course. Anyway, going back to the medical lens of successful aging, so there are a lot of technologies like joint replacement. A couple of comments. I'm just going to finish what I have to say, and we will address those comments 100%. LASIK surgery, heart wall replacement, microacupuncture to deal with, you know, your diminishing spinal capacity and increasing your flexibility and so on. So there's a number of researchers have cautioned against the medical gaze and advocacy of health-related self-care. Their concern is that when bodily processes are viewed through the medical gaze, what happens is, rather than looking at it as a way that individuals can age, there's an opinion that a cure or an anti-aging solution must be found. So once you have anti-aging medicine, you can successfully age, and that seems to be the argument, which is why it's problematic. I'm going to go to the chat window, I believe. Oops, sorry. So we can address. We have 3 individuals who have comments. Bear with me while I do this. There we go. Oh, Jenna starts, I guess it's, there's a really nice thread here. So if you have a chance, I'm going to take a minute to read this so we can see what the conversation's about. The aging process is simply the body growing weak and dying. Yes, viewing it from a medical perspective, regardless of how aging should be viewed as a privilege. The human body does, yeah, your immune system is growing weak. Yeah, so I guess we addressed that part. Chloe says there's a lot of pressure in healthcare to fix people. I have thought about how this impacts on people's lifestyles. So people not work as hard. Is it based on reliance? I think we went through that. Michelle says, I just have to say that I'm loving this topic of conversation and this course. It is being beautifully explained in our course. Very interesting concepts. Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate the feedback. The other Michelle, with 1 L, Michelle Golbika, do the same thing and get sick back, and we will make money on your conditions. Sorry, Michelle, you're going to have to, at some point, we'll finish the slide and I'll have you explain what you said because I'm not sure what you mean. Suzanne says, a lot of amazing content. Yeah, I agree. I enjoyed reading this textbook myself. I thought it was great. It was well done, lots of commentary, lots to think about. I am going to go ahead and finish up this slide. I think we have a few more things to do, but what we will do is, well, how are we doing on time? We are at lunchtime, so I'll just finish the slide. We'll let we'll let Michelle Golbika explain what she's talking about, and then I'm going to split the students up into their breakout rooms so that you guys can collaborate, and then hopefully you all will be watching the film or have already watched the film because we're going to try to situate it in the stuff that we've already learned so far. Okay, so bear with me for a second. Let's talk about technically assisted aging. A separate concern, of course, is whether or not the medical gaze on things is a slippery slope towards cyborg aging. I mean, I guess if you're trying to treat everything, then what is the point? Where is the point at which we say, you know what, this person's getting forgetful? We have a wonderful technology where we can implant a 4 terabyte memory chip in the brain with a beautiful neural computer interface, and which works beautifully with the natural brain. And guess what? All of a sudden, the 75-year-old will no longer forget anything because we can put that in. You know what? While we're at it, let's put in a new processor to assist their regular brain to pick up the speed as well. Okay, and we're not saying things will go that way. But there is a separate concern whether we are heading towards a slippery slope towards cyborg aging. And the author does not think that's realistic. So he cites a couple authors, Kelly Joyce and Mika Low. Science and technology have become central to the lived experiences of aging men and all others. Right from pharmaceuticals to GPS technology, old men interact with many everyday technologies to maintain their lifestyles. They're just ordinary men using technologies. They're not going to become cyborgs, such as Robocop or something like that. Some people are hopeful that the medical gaze on aging and the rise of new medical technologies might have the beneficial effect of releasing old men from the stigmatized status. So there is a benefit to, and I see that. I mean, if aging memory is to be flawed and technology is helpful in virtual assistants or whatever you can use with Siri or your different apps, that's not necessarily, that might be liberating for older people. And the same can be said for all of the other practices. A fixed replaced knee might be liberating, a new heart valve might be liberating. These all, so the lenses are very important. My issue is the pushing of all of these different cures by for-profit organizations who are changing or constantly trying to meld the narrative to be able to make more money. That's my problem with the medicalized system that's occurring for addressing aging. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause here. We are going to try to stick to the timelines for everything so that we don't get delayed. So I'm going to stop my screen share and I'm going to split. Sorry, before I completely stop everything, Michelle, you had a comment. I wanted you to go ahead and address what you said. Let's see. I couldn't entirely understand your comment.
I was just referring to the example that you gave about your friend that was asked to get the knee replacement and then continue with the activity.
Yeah, and then they'll make more money out of him. That's what you were saying. Yeah. I see what you're saying. Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Okay, I get it now. Yeah, probably.
Because if they want to hop, they'll ask him to stop, but asking him to go back to the activity so they can get another money.
Yeah.
It's like a cycle, right? A money making cycling.
Yeah. Go ahead, get your new knee, do more stuff, come back in 5 more years, we'll give you 2 more.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially in the US where it's all for profit, right? Medicine, it's a different story here. Okay, so right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We will get the groups going. Breakout rooms. It'll take me a few minutes to do this, so yeah, please bear with me. And a couple of things while I still have you all here. I'm assigning the breakout rooms. If you leave the breakout rooms, you will need me to put you back in. That's unfortunately a problem. So what I would suggest is once you're assigned to your breakout room, if you have to leave your computer, just tell your peers that I have to go do something. Don't log out. Because if I'm watching, I'm going to remind myself of what the film is. I've seen the film, it's been a while, so I'm going to look at it again. So if I'm watching the film and I don't pay attention, you're just going to be waiting for a while. Okay, so once I assign you, if you have to leave, just tell your peers and so on. Okay, what are we finding? We're looking for Okay, we got that one.
So are we gonna receive separate links to break out into our groups, or?
I'm still assigning them. Sorry, it's going to automatically invite you to your respective rooms.
Okay, all right.
Just give me, I would say, turn it on now. And so we probably missed a good chunk of the discussions. I apologize, but we captured most of the lectures, and we moving forward, it should be fine. Yeah, so that's a difficult one. I mean, if you look at the concept of masking or masquerading, I don't agree with that way of describing things, but the fact that he isn't retired, Biggs, who spoke about masquerading and bridging, he might argue that, well, he's masquerading, doing roles of something that was someone that was younger or whatever it is, if that lens were to be applied. Okay. This has been a great discussion, but I'm going to absolutely have to go to the chat window because I feel like I've ignored it. So for a little bit. Okay, so let's see, where are we? Okay, so Kendra says, my takeaway from the film, obviously you can all read it. I'm just going to read it aloud. So if anybody wants to have a think, we'll go through all the comments first, and then we can, if needed, we'll discuss the comments a little bit more. My takeaway from the film was a search for masculinity where violence was used to sustain male dominance. Yeah, even though the dominance and control is within a very male context. Well, it's not necessarily. I don't remember any graphic killing of females in the film. Maybe I missed something. Anyway, the point is, yes, even though that's not necessarily the case, violence was used to sustain dominance amongst the males. That's true. Hegemonic masculinity, that's more structured, and we see it a little bit in how he controls his wife. He doesn't, the guy that finds the money, he doesn't give his wife all the information. He just asks her to leave. So he's controlling her by controlling information and telling her where to go. So there is some of the societal, the structural masculine control within a relationship. We see that. Lots of compliments for Brian, very well explained and well done. Akifa says, I think that society thought of violence as a way of showing their toughness and masculinity. And you have to think about the environment. This is a desert environment. There's a lot of violence associated with drugs and drug money. So it's similar to the Glaswegian incident situation in the sense that it was a tough neighborhood. So masculinity was, in that context, it was viewed as being tough, being able to shoot a gun, being able to kill people. Valen showed his toughness by showing that he could take on everyone and everything and protect himself. The serial killer showed his toughness by taking control of everyone's lives in his own hands. Yeah, good point. Erica says, Llewellyn also showed his masculinity when he sent his girlfriend away as a means to protect her. Yep, he essentially played the masculinity script as it pertains to that time to a T. He controlled information, he sent her away to protect her, and he obviously tried to keep himself as safe as possible and tried not to put her at risk. And then he goes to meet the killer as a means of preventing his wife from getting killed as well. Chloe says, I saw many different types of masculinity being protective, macho, and powerful. The biggest thing for me was the realization at the end and an internal argument, problem felt because of societal pressures and retiring from his role. Yeah, I suppose, so I like the comments. Yeah, he does. Obviously, he's conflicted because there's a change in his roles as he retires, and now he's getting, he's asking his wife how he can help her be useful, and so that was kind of interesting. Akila says, near the end, the sheriff mentioned that he was quitting, and he mentioned he couldn't do the job any longer, if I'm right, or it was too much, it was bigger than him or something like that, to that effect. I think he may have felt this way as he was growing older, thinking he was unable to continue his job as he thought he may be losing his masculinity. See, I'm not sure I'm not sure he felt, I felt that he was reconciling with his changing masculinity. I don't know that he felt that he's losing. When you think about losing your masculinity, that means you're subscribing to a never-ending masculinity. And I'm not quite sure he subscribed to it. I think he was more accepting of his changing situation. But it is thought-provoking. I mean, it's a good thing to think about. I think he may have thought this as well because he wasn't able to stop the killer and solve the case. Possibly. Also, the killer, I feel like a sense of masculinity was portraying his power as whoever he approached would be killed. And as the audience watching the film as well, when we see him, we sense his power as well, knowing what will happen next. Yeah, you almost anticipate that he's going to kill pretty much everybody he meets. Very interesting to see all different masculinities. This is Susaneth and the habitus of all the characters. Just to some extent, we have a sense for the habitus, but we don't have too much details, which is fine. The sheriff, Erica says, the sheriff seemed to portray hegemonic masculinity in the way he carried himself. And yeah, he acts as a mentor. He mentors the younger guy, and he's in charge, and he tells the younger assistant deputy what to do, and the way he carried himself. We watch his decision making, his fighting. He was in touch with the field as in the town, and after retiring, he seemed to embody what we touched on in class, and older adults don't view themselves as growing old. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, when letting the sheriff's position go, he seemed to struggle with the changes, wanting to keep going and stay young and active. There could be, and I know the film itself doesn't give us too much information. Susanette says, although Moss portrayed a tough masculine man. He still had the heart and felt a sense of honor to bring a dying man. Oh, Llewellyn, yes, he was a tough man, but he still, wanted to bring water to the other guy. Sorry, I'm not sure why. Let's pop this out so I can see this better. The violence itself is a big theme. I think that was the last comment from Michelle. Okay, so a very, very interesting discussion. Obviously, I mean, we all have a slightly different lens. We look at the characters and we look at it through our different lenses. But it's interesting, all of the different masculinities portrayed. For me, the most interesting were the older characters, like the sheriff himself, just because he's going through a transition. Is portraying a very different masculinity, and that's why you have two different masculinities who are very, very different and opposite, and how they maintain control is quite different. Actually, you have three, because you have Llewellyn, who's also a pretty strong character in the film. So anyway, I hope you liked the film. I know it was a little violent and gruesome, but I thought overall the film was well done. And there was enough in there for us to talk about. One thing I want to do for tomorrow is I don't want us to wait until 3:45 to meet, because it doesn't give us any time to cover anything left over from the lecture session, and then it goes into the next day. So we'll meet at 3:30 as opposed to 3:45, and that way we have enough time to discuss anything that's left from the chapter. I think that's what we'll do, and I'll try to finish the lecture content before the lunch break. The other question is, do you folks want me to leave the breakout, to reopen the breakout rooms till 9 p.m.? Will you all be using it? What do you think? Evan says yes. Henry says no. You know what? I'll leave them open so you can join. If you choose not to, that's entirely up to you. I'll turn them off at 9:30. So that way you have the option. But obviously, if you sign out, I'm not going to be. Yes, Melissa, you had a question.
I did want to talk with you privately, but I was just wondering how I can do that, since we can't do it in person, obviously, and it's a little bit hard to explain over email. I just had some questions. Sure. So you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the breakout rooms. I'm going to create a separate breakout room for you and me to meet. Okay. Okay. So let me do that. Let me restart up the breakout rooms, and then I'll just move you out of your room, get you to the new breakout room, and you and I can have a chat. And then you can go back to your room. Evan, thank you. Is that applause? It looks like applause. Well, I'm glad you liked the class today. I think sorry, go ahead, Joan.
Okay, so I watched the movie, to be honest.
Yeah.
I didn't, some parts of this movie I didn't understand. It didn't make sense to me. At one stage I called and somebody answered me and said he would explain in the end. Because for me, I don't really watch these type of movie. Anything having shooting or stuff, I am out. So I'm glad for the explanation of the guys who watch it. It makes more sense now listening. Thank you. And I do want to talk to you too, but I don't want to talk to you with everybody. So if you
correct, you would like a private conversation. So why don't you do one thing? I don't know how long my conversation with Melissa will take. If you want to wait for a few minutes, I'm going to meet Melissa in a different break room. I'm going to just go ahead and activate the break rooms first, breakout rooms. So all the breakout rooms are now open. There are 6 people not assigned. We'll assign them after.
And as I said again, thanks for the guys who explained it, because now it started to make a little bit of more sense to me.
Okay, good, excellent. All right, so give me a few minutes. There are a couple chat things. I'll address those as well.
Okay.
So Michelle, you have a message to me. Yeah, it's hard for me to respond to a lot of things in the middle of class, even at the beginning of class, just because, you know, it's an all-day process and there's really no break. If anybody needs an extension for the assignment due tonight, you can have one more day to complete it and hand it and drop it in the Dropbox tomorrow. Any additional extensions beyond that, there will be a mark penalty. Just because, you know, I'm going to try to start marking as and when I have free time in between, and I don't want to hold anybody up. Okay. So if anybody is running late, they've had a whole bunch of things to do, they're having a hard time, just go ahead and hand it in tomorrow night as opposed to today night.
Okay.
I hope that's helpful to everybody.
Yes, it is.
Okay, excellent. All right, it looks like a bunch of students have chosen to not use the break rooms now. I can only assign people who are already around. I'm not able to assign people to breakout rooms if they aren't here. We have Akifa, Akila, Erica, and Susaneth. Melissa is here. Melissa, I'll just join you in breakout room 3. The others, Akifa, I believe you've been assigned the breakout room, have you not?
It didn't pop up, but I don't think I'm going to be using it today.
Okay, and how about you, Akila?
Yeah, sorry, I have a breakout room, but I don't think I'm going to use that right now.
That's fine. Susaneth, yourself?
I'm actually okay. I met with my group earlier today.
You're good.
We're good, so thank you.
Okay, no problem. Melissa, I will join you shortly in breakout room 3.
I actually clicked later because I thought it was going to be in a different one. I don't know how to click it again.
Oh, okay. Let's see. I'm going to say. I'll just create another breakout room. That might be the easiest way to do it. Okay. Let's do this breakout room. So I'm going to move you to breakout room 4, which is also empty, and it should send you an invitation of some sort, telling you that you're assigned to breakout room 4. Does it do that?
I haven't gotten one yet.
Okay. This is weird.
Oh wait, hang on. Actually. Oh, actually, I think.
Okay, you're in. Okay, I'm going to meet you there in a second. Everybody else, I mean, continue whatever you're doing. There we go. Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you. Okay, how can I help?
So I was just curious about the first assignment, and I know you've had a lot of questions about it, and I've been listening to all the answers as well. But just going through it, so I guess I had picked 2 paradigms, one being the constructionism and the other being essentialism.
Wonderful.
So I was kind of just curious about the breakdown, I guess, because you were saying that this one is kind of essay style. So for the introduction, I was kind of, I guess, confused as to what goes in that section, because you know how we have to describe it in our own words and then do differences and similarities?
Correct.
I just wasn't sure how to completely separate like separate those two, and then I wasn't sure like do those sections go in the body, or does like my interpretation of it go in the introduction, or is the introduction like, do I talk about paradigms and masculinities, or I'm not sure what would be best.
The wonderful thing about essays is there's a lot of freedom in how you express your response.
Okay.
So you chose essentialism, and what else did you choose?
The constructionist one.
Okay, the constructionist models. So you can start your introduction. The introductory paragraph is to talk about different models of masculinity. You can name a few different ones, and you can say that it was of your interest to pick the essentialist paradigm and to pick the constructionist paradigm. And you know, the essentialist and the constructionist, there is a little bit of overlap, and you're going to say for the most part they are separate models. They talk about masculinity in very different ways, but there is a sense of overlap, and you talk about why you think there's an overlap, and then you talk about how they're very, very different. Because if you remember, the essentialist focuses on the idea that your male roles were considered masculinity, and they were assigned to you, making the argument that this is how society will work well. It's essential to society, it's essential to the well-being. You know, so however you want to craft those sentences, go ahead and do that. Okay? And the constructionist is a little bit different, and you want to talk about why it's called the constructionist paradigm. What is the foundation for that, and how parts of the constructionist paradigm overlap with the essentialist model. For example, there are several constructed roles, socially constructed roles, which foundationally are essentialist.
Okay.
But you know, constructionism goes beyond that, and then you talk about what you read. And I don't want to give you the answer. That's why I'm not telling you everything.
Well, because so for what I've written down, like I have a lot of differences, obviously.
Sure.
I mean, like the differences, like the big ones being that like the essentialism is like their inevitable, natural, universal qualities with men and women, and like only sex and sex differences existed. It's biologically determined, and like male is masculine and females is feminine and stuff like that. But and the other one would be like gender is created and influenced by society and culture and stuff like that. So I have those differences, but I was just kind of confused at first as to like the similarities, because I didn't understand how they
overlap.
Yeah.
So this is the thing, depending on what paradigms. Sorry.
No, I was just trying to say like these like terms are very new to me. Like I am in nursing, and I've never taken sociology before. And so it is new to me, and I was trying to read, and I've been looking at a lot of scholarly articles on the terms, but it's very new to me. That's why I was a little bit confused.
Okay, first of all, what I'd suggest is don't overwhelm yourself. There's a lot of information on both of these models, okay? There's no limit to what you can find. So use just the textbook. The textbook does a pretty good job. The fundamental basis of essentialism is these roles are necessary because without this, society would collapse. These are essential.
Okay.
And that's the basis of the essentialist paradigm. Okay, whether it's a basis of sex and whatever it is, it's the argument that is that these roles are essential and they have to be this way.
But these ones are socially constructed.
So constructionists argues the opposite. These are all constructed, and these are all made up rules.
Okay.
Right? That's the fundamental difference. Yeah. But even constructionist model has a role to play in supporting the essentialist model.
Okay.
Right? Because when you say men have to behave like A, B, and C, it's an essentialist argument, but the constructionist design in the past has supported the essentialist model, saying that, oh yeah, this is the role men have to play.
Right.
But the good thing about the constructionist paradigm is that it has evolved over time to reconstruct and reconfigure and reconstruct what roles look like.
Okay.
Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, it does.
Okay, good. Are we good? Can I
I think so. I think I just had, I just want to ask one more question.
Sure.
About the shortcomings, if what I was going to put was okay, and if you don't want to answer, that's okay. But I was taking it from the textbook. So for the constructionism, I read it and we had talked about it in class, is that I guess they had started like the criticism about it very early, I guess shortly after, about the